Evening. I'd like to call to order the Lakewood City Council and Lakewood Reinvestment Authority joint study session in the city of Lakewood, Colorado on September 17th, 2018, 7 p.m. in council chambers. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Paul.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Vincent. Here. Beta.
Here.
Franks.
Here.
Roybal.
Here.
Gutwein. Here. Skilling. Here. Harrison. Here. Abel.
Here.
LeBure.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Great. All right. Well, welcome to everybody who's here in chambers this evening. Looks like a lot of familiar faces who probably have to be here this evening, but we want to welcome you and those who may be tuning in or tuning in at a separate date. Tonight is a big night for the city of Lakewood. This is when the budget is rolled out. This is something that starts early in the year and has had a lot of work. And council, I want to thank this year for all of your due diligence ahead of time. There's been a lot of great questions asked and they were pouring in. So thank you for that, and thank you to staff, especially today, for your marathon answers that you were able to get back to us in time for the discussion tonight. This is the first opportunity for the presentation of the budget. And unlike most ordinances, this actually will have two public hearings. So we'll have two more opportunities for the public to engage going forward. And with that, I'll now turn the presentation of the 2018 revised 2019 City of Lakewood budget over to our finance director, Mr. Larry Dorr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of City Council. Once again, Larry Dorr, City of Lakewood Finance Director and City Treasurer. Welcome to the 2019 budget study session. And I want to give a special welcome to our three council members for whom this will be your first budget study session, Councilors Beta, Skilling, and LeBure. And I've been told by many council members over the years that this is really one of the most memorable and exciting experiences you can have as a council member. In fact, I still email the budget link to former council members that I've worked with. I don't know if they're clicked or not, but nonetheless, thank you for your engagement in this process sincerely. We have fielded a number of questions, and I can tell that council is very highly engaged, both the budget and audit board and council as a whole. And so let us just commence. We have quite a packed show for you tonight that will probably feel familiar to a number of council members who've participated in this over the years. But of course, there are always updates and new initiatives to bring you up to speed on. We have had for the City Council a paper copy of the book for some 10 days now. It's 540 plus pages, and it's got charts and graphs and paragraphs and columns and numbers, everything that might appeal to anybody who's looking for any information on the budget, of course. And, you know, we keep in mind our sustainability practices at the city. We won't be producing another copy of this unless there are just major substantial changes. We probably would just produce a few extra pages for you, should there be any changes. But of course, it'll be online. It's been online since the 7th of September and available to the public and council members and so forth. So we won't be producing another paper copy, but I know that each of you will have, you know, dog-eared pages and tabs and flags sticking out. So we've got that, had that out for several days. If you're wondering, the sculpture on the front cover was one of the City of Lakewood's first pieces of public art that it acquired in 1994. This sculpture is Snapshot, and it is displayed at Addenbrook Park, and it was produced by Ms. DeDecker, the artist that produced the sculpture. So if you're wondering about that, you've got it.
I think there's actually more to that history as well, is that I think Michael Jackson is portrayed in it as a child.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah. Yes. And I understand the sculptor had the chance to meet Michael Jackson at some point during his life. So thank you for that. You know, we have a large team that works on the budget, and I want to give thanks to all of those department directors and all of the division managers and budget coordinators in the various departments who've worked on the budget for the last number of months now to get to this next big step, which is your study session tonight. So I want to thank all of those individuals. And of course, really, I think the person at City Hall that works on the budget the most is our budget accountant, Carrie Murky, and she's here in the audience helping me tonight with the presentation, and is really our facilitator and coordinator of the budget, making sure that we are in compliance and we keep all of the details in order. So without further ado, let me just talk a little bit with all of you and the public about what has been done so far. Of course, we've been accumulating our revenue forecast and spending initiatives. We've had some study sessions related to infrastructure needs and so forth across the city. We've been doing some work on that. But our Budget and Audit Board met formally on July 23rd to preview our assumptions and our forecasts in the budget. Our Budget and Audit Board consists of 3 council members, Beta, Harrison, and LeBure, and 2 citizen members, Donald Tallman and John Ludwigson. And may I just give a shameless announcement that the city is recruiting candidates who have to be a resident of Lakewood to be members of the council's Budget and Audit Board. You have until tomorrow night to submit an application. Please do so, and the City Council Screening Committee will review those and make a recommendation for the next appointment to the Budget and Audit Board. So please apply. Please check out this very interesting opportunity to serve your community. And if you want more information, of course, you can go to our website, lakewood.org, and read about the board. But you can also check page 19 in the budget book, and we've got some information there that you can see. Well, after this study session, the work's not done. We will still always be accepting questions, and the portal is open for you to submit questions through council members. Council members, you can send those directly to me. I've been sort of the quarterback with all the various departments in terms of tracking down all of the questions, and I want to tell you the majority of those were answered by others, not me, so I want to give credit where it's due there. But we still have some 5 weeks before the budget will be adopted in the 4th Monday of October. So plenty of time for questions, adjustments, changes. This is just yet another stop along the way, but it's a big one. And then, as the mayor mentioned, we'll have 2 public hearings. The public will get a chance to come down and make comments and speak about any matter on the budget. So a little bit of the calendar. So what will we be doing tonight? I know that our new council members to this process are just eager to find out what the next steps are. I've got 3 co-presenters who will be coming down. Our Police Chief, Dan McCaskey, our Public Works Director, Jay Hutchison, and our Director of Community Resources, Kit Newland. They'll be doing a variety of things for you, updating you on some initiatives that we've accomplished, things are in progress, and then proposals for 2019. I'll get into a little bit of the budget background and sort of how it all comes together and how it might make sense to the audience and to all council members. It'll be a little bit of a refresher even if you've been through this. I do go into a little bit of detail of the revenue forecast. That's probably probably one of the most important things, because it's the thing that we can't control as a city. The income varies, and we need to pay special attention to that. And then even for you seasoned veterans, even for me, we have a little twist tonight, and that is the Tabor budget. I'm just going to call it that because it's easier, but it refers to City Council's Resolution 2018-36. Council adopted a resolution setting forth that it would produce a separate budget, and I'm going to guide us all through that and take input and suggestions as we get into it. And we'll have some more details about what might be next steps. By the way, I should say that while I'll just have 3 co-presenters, I will be speaking about spending initiatives in the Information Technology Department, in the Municipal Court, and in our Human Resources Employee Relations Department. I'm still working on getting that name just right. So then, of course, we'll have discussion, questions and answers. I'll address a number of the questions that City Council has. And as mentioned a moment ago, the city has an urban renewal authority, and it's a separate legal entity. It has its own tax ID number, its own bank accounts, its own mission and purpose. It's not subject to Tabor. And you are sitting as commissioners right now of that board, and I'm going to walk through the budget presentation for the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority so that we can talk about the spending, the responsibilities and authorities, and of course, any and all questions and answers regarding the LRA. So without further ado, back to the city budget, and I'm just going to go ahead and dive right into it. You know, the budgeting process, a lot of different ways to go about it. Some cities do things a little bit differently. We've certainly adapted the city of Lakewood's process year in and year out, little bits around the edges to try to make things more efficient, primarily via feedback from city council and the public on how we might approach things a little bit differently and more efficiently. But first, and where I'll start in tonight's presentation, is on estimating income for the city, or revenue, because it's a thing we can't control. And if I can draw an analogy, if you grew up in a self-employed household, as I did, or if you live in a salaried household, you understand the difference between the two of those things. If you live in a self-employed household, you know that income can go up and down from year to year, and you need to plan for that just a little bit differently. If you live in a household with a fixed income, you can predict that income and you can, again, budget a little bit differently. Well, the city, as a going concern, as a financial entity, really is like a self-employed household. The income to the city will go up and down based on a variety of different factors. And so we need to approach that with that mindset and make decisions accordingly. But the first step in the process is, what do we have to work with? And then maybe what do we want to do with those resources? Because while we get into the next step, and that's prioritizing expenses, you know, one of my colleagues said a long time ago, we can do anything, but we can't do everything. We have so many competing priorities. For example, obviously public safety and police, there are many, many needs. We want to do things as a community in the area of sustainability. We have infrastructure needs, and infrastructure is a broad term, a broad word. It includes buildings like our civic center. It includes our recreation facilities, also buildings, but a lot of twists and turns, a lot of differences. We have many infrastructure needs in the area of transportation. You can start, and transportation itself, of course, is pedestrians, bicycles, automobiles, all those different things. And then we have needs in technology, both inside city government and outside in the community. So we have many, many priorities. They all compete against one another, and we just can't do everything. We just can't. So that's the more challenging part. While estimating income is very complicated and challenging, figuring out the right priorities is difficult, and that's what the policymakers are here to do. We also should save for a rainy day, because boy, we've had some rainy days in Lakewood, particularly May 8, 2017, which was quite a stunning event in Lakewood, and that was the hailstorm at Colorado Mills. And I've got a few numbers on that to show you, but that was a $4 million rainy day. And I'll tell you, that's a whopper. That's a big rainy day. So we should save for a rainy day, because the community expects a continuity of services. They expect to, call 911. They expect their signal lights to be on. They expect to show up in their parks and at their recreation centers, and on and on. So we need to be prepared for that. And now I'll get a little bit technical. We do budget by fund. And you might wonder right off, that sounds like jargon, and it is. And so I want to address that, particularly for those who might not be familiar with it. Here's another page in the budget that gives you an outline of all of the city funds. And you'll see, of course, our general fund, and I'm going to spend almost the entire night talking about the general fund. But our second largest is the capital improvement fund, but it's much, much smaller than the general fund. In fact, the general fund is 2/3 of the entire spending in the budget, which means it's twice as large as everything else put together. Of course, we have all manner of internal service funds. We have our enterprise funds, like our golf, water, sewer, and stormwater management utility, and on and on. Of course, I'm open to any and all questions regarding those funds, but because the general fund allows the greatest amount of flexibility for city council to provide services to the community, I'm going to spend my time there. So I mentioned we want to start by estimating the income to the city so that we can then have you start to prioritize what might be happening there. And You all know that we are driven by sales and use tax. Use tax is a complement to sales tax. It works exactly like it. It's primarily paid by businesses. And then you can see we start getting down into some of the other sources of revenue, and they're much smaller, though significant. I mean, obviously, consider the idea that 1% of the general fund is over $1 million now. Any one of these can add up to a pretty good amount. By the way, whenever I see the word other and it amounts to 8%, I get skeptical, and of course we can talk more about that, but this is things like fines and investment income and things like that. The city's reserves are invested in bonds and CDs and things like that, and so we have interest income, but none of those accumulates to greater than 1%, so that pie chart would start to get kind of fuzzy if we added more of those. So more about the sales tax. What is it? How does it work? If you buy any tangible goods in Lakewood or have them delivered to your home, you pay a 7.5% sales tax, but only 3% of the 7.5% is the Lakewood sales tax. Now there is a transportation district in the south part of Jefferson County and that touches Lakewood just a little bit, and that adds just a little more to the sales tax, but this gives you a little flavor for what's there. Jefferson County Open Space, State of Colorado, the Regional Transportation District, and the Scientific and Cultural Facilities District. I mentioned earlier that the second largest source of income to the city is the property tax. Well, how much of the property tax bill comes to the city? And as you can see on a $350,000 home in Lakewood, and I'm showing my age just a little bit. I used to have that. I looked that up from many years ago, and it was $200,000 very early on in my career at Lakewood. And so obviously there's been quite an escalation in the affordability of housing. Well, Lakewood's property tax in the total amount would be $54. You can see that. Obviously the lion's share going to the school district and the county. And the county's a primary source of income, and the school district and the fire district for that matter being property tax. Okay. All right, so one of the first things you might want to know before we got into predicting the 2019 revenue is sort of how are things going this year? How are things going so far? We've got a full 8 months in the books, and that means 7 months of sales tax because the sales tax comes in a month later. But that's still a lot of information. How are we doing? And I mentioned Colorado Mills. Well, we've had a slight increase in our sales tax revenue, and you'll see that the mills now, year to date, has collected more than it did last year to date, and that's favorable, so that's contributing to the increase. Use taxes have decreased quite a lot, and everybody is aware of that. I don't think there are any surprises because this really dates to the hailstorm, and during the first half of last year, people were doing roof replacements, they were replacing automobiles and so forth, and there was just a flurry of activity doing that. And those revenues have decreased, not surprisingly, and we've predicted these in our original 2018 budget. And then you see intergovernmental revenue, and that was one of the questions I got from City Council, and I'll dive into that in a little more detail later, but I've got this highlighted in the presentation because 36% is a very large number, as is $1,384,000. And this relates to the state of Colorado's, the legislature's Senate Bill 1801. And you may have been reading about this, you may have heard about it, but it's essentially a transfer of the gasoline tax to local governments for transportation improvements. This is really just an increase in revenue due to the Highway Users Trust Fund. This wasn't in our original budget because it hadn't been passed last year when we were coming about this. So this is unanticipated. So I got a little asterisk next to it, but you'll notice I also need to remind all of us as we go through the budget every year that there are Tabor revenue limitations, and that source of revenue has no exemption at all, so it would just increase the refund. So that's kind of the story around that. I need to highlight that for each of these things. Charges for services, we've had some increases here as well, and those have been very productive. And then lastly, how are we doing in total? 5.2%. So we've got an increase in revenue. We are sort of managing that relative to Tabor, and I'll show you what some of the Tabor limitations will be here on the next slide. Also related to revenue, and I don't have a bullet for this, but I want to talk about it just a little bit because there's been quite a bit of media attention around a recent United States Supreme Court decision in the case of South Dakota, the state of South Dakota, versus the Wayfair Corporation. Now, if you don't know anything about the Wayfair Corporation, let me just explain. They're an online retailer. They're quite large. They have billions and billions of dollars in annual revenue, and they sell through the internet. They sell all manner of home decor and accessories and so forth. If you want to go right out and check them out, you can. If you're a shopper with them, you know them well. If you're not a shopper of those kinds of things, you probably never heard of them. Anyway, it's a multi-billion-dollar company, and they only sell online. And the Supreme Court decided in the favor of the state of South Dakota. And what they decided was that the Wayfair Corporation had economic nexus, meaning they're doing business in South Dakota, even though they don't have a physical presence. And that's all changed, really the landscape of things. And so you might wonder, where is that in the city's forecast? And I'll tell you, it's something that we've been studying since midsummer. It's only late summer, right? We've been studying that since midsummer as to what might be the impacts, and we had been anticipating, that we might need to do some analysis, so we weren't completely silent on the activity. But we've done a few things. One, we're consulting with our city attorney's office to determine whether or not the city would need to change its ordinance to present some statement regarding economic nexus. By the way, the state of Colorado they've just done a memo really from the Department of Revenue, and they think that's probably strong enough, but we're going to get our own legal advice. And if the ordinance of the city needs to change, we would have to bring that to city council. And then there's also a concern that that's a change in tax policy with a revenue gain, and that might require voter approval. So we're navigating all of those waters, but at the same time, we're keeping in mind that 2/3 of that sales tax revenue would be limited by Tabor, and is something we'd need to keep in mind. And then also, when I've just done a thumbnail, if you take the population of Lakewood versus the population of the country, and then you check that against the sales of Wayfair, it's probably not more than 6 figures in total income to the city of Lakewood from sales tax on the high end. So it's probably not a material change to $100 million plus general fund revenue budget. So I want to give some attention to that. Thank you. We don't employ any full-time economists at the city to help us forecast sales tax rate growth or consumer price index change or any of those things. So we rely on outside sources, and it's worked pretty well. In the last year, you might say, how are we doing, and could you give us a report card? And I'm happy to do that. Last year, our revenues collected were $112,946,925. And our forecast was off $50,116. That is 0.04%. We will never do that good a job. I can almost guarantee you that, ever. I guess we got lucky. In addition, and we're pretty good too, though, I might say. In addition, our operating revenue exceeded our operating expenditures by $211,000. So that's putting the tax dollars to work for the community, to my mind, and that's also helping our policymakers make very precise strategic decisions in their budgeting. So far, so good. We have forecasted sales tax base growth for 2018 of 3% and for 2019, 4%. And I say base growth because we've got all this stuff going on at Colorado Mills, which I'll talk a little bit about. And that's businesses that have just opened, which is exciting, and businesses that are about to open, and which is even more exciting. So our base economic growth, 3% and 4%. And you can see that the state economists, the top one is the governor's office, and the bottom one would be the legislatures. Of course, the governor proposes the budget, the legislature adopts it, not unlike our process, quite honestly, two different branches there. But you can see that the sales tax forecast for the state is quite high. It's quite high. Population growth, disposable income, and so forth. By the way, these are all PhD economists. They're a team of PhD economists, these people. They're very impressive. And then, of course, what I also have to put up here is the Consumer Price Index, and that's not just any CPI. That's the Denver Aurora Lakewood consumer price index that we're looking at, because that is what the city's revenue is limited by under Tabor. And so we need to look at both this number. We have to estimate local growth because the county doesn't give that to us until November. And then we have to take a really best guess at what the Tabor refund might be. It's very challenging, but we know pretty comfortably that it's not going to be a level that the state is forecasting. It's probably going to be closer to CPI. That's been our experience in the past. In addition, so we've looked at how are we doing so far this year? What are the economists saying? And then we ask, what do we know about Lakewood? Well, we know a few things. We look around and we have a feel for what's going on in the Lakewood economy. And I've said this for years, but one of the biggest indicators of prosperity and quality of life and a safe community is outside investment. Because I can tell you the Marriott Corporation has two $10 million hotels. I feel like we're the monopoly board. They're putting hotels, places, which is a good thing. And so the Marriott Corporation, they obviously believe they can make money in Lakewood. And they can invest. They can open up hotels anywhere in the world, any country around the globe, and they are building two $10 million hotels in Lakewood. So get your mind around that a little bit. And this is the Marriott Springfield Suites at the Colorado Mills. And what I love about this is not only do you stay in the hotel and you have a lodger's tax and a sales tax and construction tax and all those things, then you go out to dinner across the parking lot anywhere. I mean, you've got 50 choices that you can walk to. And so I don't know about you, but if I was visiting the area, what a great place to stay, because you can go to couple movie theaters, right? You've got restaurants, you can go shopping. I mean, that is just the way to go. So I'm excited for this hotel project, and also excited for the Marriott Fairfield Inn as well, which is also coming to Lakewood. So I'm gonna give you a few more highlights because I really get excited about this stuff. These are the Alameda Shops at Belmar. This is a $2 million retail project at 625 South Salisbury. And I must give kudos to our building department, our permit counter. They really provide us in the budget office all of these details, and we get to kind of check out what's going on in the community. Also, this means jobs, right? This is 5800 West Colfax. This is the car wash that is happening out there. It's open, now, and all of that. It's very exciting. And not only have I shown you sort of the private sector, but I want to show you some not-for-profit educations. This is Colorado Academy. They're investing $6 million into their school. That's fantastic for multipurpose facilities. Also in the education space, this is the Rockmount Hall Dormitory at Colorado Christian University. This is a multi-million-dollar facility just a stone's throw away from here at Civic Center. And of course, I love bulldozers, love to see those out in the community. I know that they're disruptive to the neighbors. I don't want to discount that for a minute, and they can be dusty, but we mitigate that. But this is investment in the community, and it speaks to prosperity. So how's the Colorado Mills doing? Boy, lots of things are opening. That's exciting. I mentioned that sales tax revenue has exceeded the place where it was last year to date, and clearly we've got a ways to go, so that feels good. H&M is open, and I put that in all caps because it's really exciting. If you don't know what H&M is, you should. You should. And you probably don't have kids in your home if you don't know what H&M is, over the age of 8 or 9. Anyway, H&M is very critical to the success of Colorado Mills because it drives foot traffic, and it drives foot traffic in the most critical demographic to retailers, and that is young people who spend 110% of their disposable income. And that's important. That is important. So H&M is open. Go there, buy something for someone. And I have to say, I don't care where you go to H&M around the country. You can go on Park Avenue in New York, or you can go on Michigan Avenue in Chicago, and I'm going to tell you, this H&M store looks every bit as good as any one of those, and it's a really nice facility, and congratulations to the company for getting reopened. I'm happy for them and their workers. Not open, however, is the Nike store and Forever 21, and I bet you know about the Nike store, but you may not know about Forever 21. Forever 21 is as important as H&M to that critical demographic. It's a very large footprint that they have there. It appears as though Nike will open before the holiday season, but it doesn't appear that Forever 21 will quite make that, which is disappointing. But I think for the long run, that will be okay. And Forever 21 is intending to reopen, so that's very favorable. And by the way, I believe, and it's going to take some time for people to remember to get back out to Forever 21 and H&M, because they've been going to Cherry Creek and Flatirons and other places, but it's going to take those two businesses, Nike and Forever 21, open and thriving, to reach the 2016 levels at Colorado Mills. That's just what it's going to take. So hence, we're watching that. Okay. So I've talked a little bit about our economy, sort of what's going on with the state level, how are things going this year to date, and now I'm going to flip the discussion over to the expense side. And as you know, we are a services organization. We don't have any patents. We don't have any finished goods, work in progress. We have no raw materials. We have no inventory. We have some inventory, of course, at our golf course, but I'm trying to communicate the idea that we're not a manufacturer, we're a service organization. So we spend 3/4 of all of our expenditures on people, and the other 1/4 is on stuff, mostly, probably another 15% that helps those people get their jobs done. Vehicles, equipment, buildings, all those kinds of things. Obviously, we spend a small amount on things like signal light, electricity, and things like that. That's a little bit indirect. But that's important to keep in mind. In terms of providing services to the community, that's really what we do. How are expenses going to date? Well, I really wanted to let you know that we've budgeted quite an increase for our police department, which of course is more than half of the general fund, more than half of everything we do. And so far that's happening. We are increasing our numbers, and we are spending more as a community on police. So year to date, 11.5%. I've not seen I don't remember seeing numbers like this during my career in terms of increased spending for the police department or for any department for that matter. So that is happening. I think that you can be encouraged by that it's already happening. And then our police chief, Dan McCaskey, will be taking the podium right after me in just a few moments. And he'll be updating you on a number of things happening in the police department, and he'll be referring indirectly to some of these numbers. So I mentioned earlier, Chief McCaskey will be coming up in a moment. He'll touch on the following subjects. You'll then meet see our Public Works Director, Jay Hutchison, and he's going to talk about transportation and utilities happening in Public Works. Kit Newland is going to talk about parks, our fitness program, which you haven't necessarily seen in prior budgets, you who are veterans, and of course facilities. Seems like just a never-ending need in these particular areas. But let me just slow down for a moment and cover these 3 bullets for my colleagues. And first, in the area of our information technology department, you should know that this budget will invest in equipment. For example, we have many City of Lakewood workers that use a mobile radio. In our Parks Department, in our Public Works Department, for example, the headquarters at our quail shops, they have a radio and they communicate out to our snowplow drivers about all manner of issues, right? Tree limbs on the road or stuck cars or whatever the case may be. And those radios are in need of replacement, and they're not inexpensive. They're pricey. In fact, they're nearly as pricey as the police radios, but they're old and they wear out. And in spite of our great efforts to keep those working over a long period of time, they reach their end of life and they have to be replaced. In addition, our information technology department in this budget would fund updates and replacements to systems. And amongst those, something that we're all familiar with, if you have a smartphone, and all of you do because you shop at H&M and Forever 21 also, you take out your smartphone and you update your apps every now and then, or they happen automatically, right? Well, we have to do that with multi-million-dollar systems, but they're not free. They're hundreds of thousands of dollars, but we need to do that. You have to do that on your phone. You have to do that on your desktop computers. You have to update systems so that they're all compatible and continue working. And our information technology department will continue to focus on that. And then also we have mandates that you'll hear a little bit about now. In our municipal courts, we have been ordered to provide certain opportunities for people who are accused of crimes to receive justice in a short period of time. Okay, that's a state mandate. We've just got to spend money on doing that, and that's having access to judges, attorneys, and all those things very quickly. And so that is also a call for additional systems for our courts to be able to do that. Also, we're adding funding for our marshals. Our marshals keep our communities safe when they are visiting our municipal courts, and we need to continue to make sure that the equipment of the marshals is up to snuff. And then also, we're needing to spend more money on interpreters. We are not only having a slight increase in the need for interpreters, but the number of different languages spoken by our citizens is increasing. And we need to be able to respond to that. Not surprisingly, some of those languages are not as popular or as common, I should say. And so therefore, those interpreters are quite expensive, quite honestly. So we need to be responsive to that. And then in our human resources department, we have long been successful as an organization in the area of employee compensation, and that is our process and the approach, be it engineers, police officers, accountants, whatever the case may be, is retention through competitive compensation, and this budget would provide for that. So I mentioned save for a rainy day, and so let me transition to how are we doing on that as a community, and you need to take a look at this. If you're new to this budget process, our three council members, you might be looking at this and thinking, I came to city council at probably a difficult time, but rest assured, this was intentional. City councils over the last few years had seen just the left side of this graph and felt like it was probably a time in a bull market to begin investing in additional community assets. And I could tell you the $12 million in reserves spent is connected to a list of projects and initiatives. It's quite long, to be honest. Some of them are not done. Some of them are still in progress, and I won't steal any of the details from my colleagues who are about to come up and tell you about them, but they'll describe some of them. And we've reached that, I think, that level. I've said before, it's not too big, it's not too small, it's probably just right, but it's probably closer to maybe small, as you'll see here in a minute. So this is this is $30 million is a lot of money. Obviously, that's a very large number, but everything's relative, right? First of all, let me also say that these monies are invested in bonds, CDs, secure investments that pay interest. So they're not, just sitting on a piece of paper and a balance sheet somewhere earning zero interest. They're earning interest, and that's contributing to general fund income, some of which is limited by Tabor and on and on. But nonetheless, those interest earnings are available for services. But here's, I think, maybe another report card and a good check-in for City Council and the public on how our reserves doing. Now, Denver is right around 10 times larger than Lakewood in terms of general fund expenditures. Jefferson County is larger. It's a smaller factor, but it's bigger. But a way to measure reserves, this is something that has been done for, nearly 100 years of the Government Finance Officers Association. The rule of thumb that has been very common is your savings account or your reserves should be some percentage of your income. So if your income is twice as much as mine, you probably would want to have twice as much in your rainy day fund than I would. That's sort of the comfort level. There's also this sort of old expression about keep 6 months of your income or 6 months of your expenses in the bank. And that would amount to a 50% fund reserve or a 50% reserve, because that'd be half a year. Or if it was keep 3 months expenses in the bank, that'd be a 25% reserve. And I think you get where I'm going with this. So whether you're Denver or Golden, I think that Golden might be the smallest one I've got listed here, it's all relative. So while Golden might have a lot less money in the bank, they might have 6 or 12 months spending in the bank. So it's all relative. That's the reason for the percentages and not dollars, because Denver would, they would have $300 million in their reserve, and that would seem amazing for Lakewood, but not so much for Denver. Okay, so how are people doing? You've already had a peek here at the list, obviously, and you can see a lot of cities you recognize. You can also see the county. And Broomfield, of course, is a city and county, so their needs might be just slightly different. So you can certainly consider that. But we're getting down there. We're getting down there as a community. So I would bet that many folks would probably look at this and think, we're good, but we need to be mindful of using those reserves either for additional strategic projects or another rainy day as it may happen. So the median or the midpoint in all these is 31%. We're just a little bit below that as a city. So we've been aggressive in investing in those projects. Now you see two others up here, Centennial and Wheat Ridge. I don't mean to tattle on them, but I just want to do this for disclosure because you might be looking at, well, where's Wheat Ridge on this thing? And they just haven't done their audit. That's all. They just haven't quite yet. Well, they've probably done it, but they don't have their statements yet, and they haven't put them on the website. And we can update this later in October if those come about, and it could change the median and so forth. But we always want to know what our neighbors are doing, and then Centennial is 100,000 population, so we always want to have them sort of on the list. So thank you for that. Hopefully I've covered our income and how that moves, and talked a little bit about how that's going to date and how it might go next year. I talked a little bit about the rainy day fund and how expenses are going. But now, let me please introduce the City of Lakewood Police Chief, Dan McCaskey, who will talk a little bit about what's been happening in the police department and what is proposed in the 2019 budget.
Right.
Chief?
Good evening, Chief. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. Thanks for your attention tonight. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about, start with what you all approved last year in our budget, and talk about some of our successes. So last year, you approved 4 agents and a sergeant for our newly formed community action team. And for those who were part of that approval, I want to say thank you. And that's probably in my career one of the best things we've ever done in the Lakewood Police Department. This team has had such a tremendous impact in our community, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through this. But also approved in last year's budget process was the remodel to a section of our public safety center to house our community action team. As many of you know, our building was built in 1984, and it housed the entire city organization at that time. And so it gets a little old and needs a little remodeling, and we've grown quite a bit since 1984 as well. Also last year, you approved a partial position for the Jefferson County Regional Crime Lab, a DNA analyst, and our DNA submissions have increased dramatically. I don't have the exact number, but they're over close to 1,000 a year right now. And DNA has been a really important tool for us in our crime fighting efforts, and probably you may have recently read in the paper and saw in the news that we have made an arrest in a 34-year-old homicide case in Lakewood that was also related to a triple homicide in Aurora back in 1984, and that was based on DNA evidence, and that was DNA that we collected from our crime scene. And so that's really something that we're happy about. That was one of those cases that I never expected to be solved in my career. So it means a great deal to the police department, and I know our community. Also last year, we approved an investigative technician for the auto theft task force, and as many of you know, there's a Metropolitan Auto Theft Task Force that a Lakewood Police Commander commands, and it's a multiple jurisdiction task force with Denver PD, Lakewood, Aurora, and several other jurisdictions. And it's been a very successful task force. Last year, we also approved a digital evidence system upgrade. And with the advent of cell phones that we're using and all of the different technology, this was a much needed upgrade for us. The technology has sort of passed me by a little bit. I think some of you might understand that, but I know our detectives and our crime lab personnel and our patrol agents are really pleased with the upgrade in the system, and it allows us to collect a lot of digital evidence that we weren't able to do so before. And then we've also, last year, approved 7 patrol vehicles and to add to our fleet because of the continuing additions to the police department. And with that, you also approved a mechanic for the Public Works Department because you need somebody to work on these vehicles. And I tell you, we are probably a little harder on our vehicles than others. So unfortunately, they do take a little bit of wear and tear. And then last year's, you also remember, Arapahoe House Withdrawal Management Services was taken over by Jefferson Center for Mental Health. And we were required to fund a portion of those expenses. Also, we're the largest users of withdrawal services in Jefferson County. We're the largest municipality. We used withdrawal management services for our citizens over 1,000 times last year. So this year we're not quite asking for as much, fortunately, but we are asking for 2 additional police agent positions. One position would go to the community action team, and 1 position would go to our traffic team. The community action team, as I mentioned, has really been an incredible addition to our police department and to the organization, the city of Lakewood, and to our citizens. And we're doing a lot of different things as well. I'll be here later this year in December talking about a lodging license that will sort of regulate some of the activities that are at some of our hotels and motels in Lakewood. We have 43 motels in Lakewood, and we probably respond close to 1,000 times a year at some of these locations. It's been a significant burden on the police department. We had one of our police agents was seriously injured at one of our motels earlier this year. So we're going to try to do some regulation and mandate some different things to lower those calls for service and to just to kind of regulate some of the behavior that goes on there. And that CAT team agent will be partially responsible for that. It's going to take a lot of work on our part, but that was one of the things we're looking at. But as I mentioned, that we're seeing a big increase in homelessness and the issues surrounding that, and our community action team has been big in helping with some of those issues. This year alone, we've posted for 68 homeless camps that we found in the city of Lakewood. Last year, we had 50 for the entire year, so we're seeing a significant increase. We also have 2 caseworkers from Jefferson Center for Mental Health embedded with our team, and they've handled almost 500 mental health referral calls this year alone. So we're seeing a huge increase in those numbers as well. So the CAT team, like I say, in my career, this is probably one of the best things that we've ever done, and I think you're all going to, for our community, I think you should be proud of the fact that you approve this and the great work they've done. We're also looking at 4 community service officers, and I'll talk a little bit about them as we go forward. But then we'd like some equipment for the new CSOs, and 2 vehicles, and just some of the other equipment that they'll need. And just briefly, I wanted to just talk about the cost of outfitting a new police agent with these 2 positions that we have now. We are paying approximately $8,000, probably even a little more than that, for every police agent that we hire to outfit them with the equipment, and that includes uniforms, exterior clothing, coats, boots, gun belt, vest, ballistic helmet, police radio. And now we're also going to, with a new MDC or new computer system, we're going to be outfitting them with computers as well. So I just wanted to share that with you, just the significant cost of when we hire agents, what it takes to outfit them. As I mentioned, the CSOs, they have been very beneficial for us right now. We started with 2 under Chief Paletto when he was here. We tried him as an experiment, and it's been very successful. They've relieved a lot of the duties of our sworn agents. And then so we have added 3 positions. So we're up to 5 CSOs now, and we'd like to take that to 9. We're going to increase some of their duties where they're going to be investigating minor traffic accidents, minor criminal events, and doing additional parking enforcement. And I know we've had a lot of conversations the past couple of years about parking, and And it's one of those duties that I would prefer not to use a sworn police agent to enforce, and so hopefully these additional CSOs will take on those duties. You know, and one of the things about the CSOs, they're easier to hire. The requirements aren't as significant as they are for a sworn person. The college degree's not there, and so they're easier to hire. They're easier to train. The training's much less. And one of the things we have found is that where we have recruits that have not made it in the police academy, they've adapted well to the CSO position, because sometimes, you know, you get in this, you're in the academy, you think you want to be a police agent, and you get out there and you realize that maybe you're not cut out for this job and it's not what you want to do. But the CSO is a different sort of job, and we've had good success with that. And we also are looking at it as a pipeline for the police department too. If you can come in and do the job for a year or two, and you get to know the culture and the organization and things like that, and we get to know you, they're also, we look to hire them as police agents. So, but they do a lot of different things. They do our crime scene work, they do parking enforcement, they pick up found property, they look at abandoned vehicles, they process recovered stolen vehicles. And this year alone, they've handled almost 6,000 calls for service. So it's really a valuable unit, and it allows us to free up police agent time to do some other higher priority activities. So, so with that, unless there's any questions, and I don't know what the plan is if we're going to afterwards.
Yeah, we'll
Okay.
come back for questions.
Okay. So thank you for your time, and I'd like to introduce Public Works Director Jay Hutchinson. He's up next, so thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. Thank you, Chief. I'm going to talk about capital improvement and preservation plan, which is in the back part of your budget. It's the pages after the last green tab. No, the next to last green tab. And it's a little bit different than the rest of the budget. The budget, including a portion of the capital improvement and preservation plan, is for the 2018 revised numbers and the 2019 plan and numbers that you would actually adopt ultimately in October. One of the things that we do in the capital improvement and preservation plan is we look a little bit further. So the plan that you see in the back of your budget goes out through 2023. And that is primarily because some of these projects take a while, and you'll see some pictures and projects that you've seen more than once because of that fact. And they're expensive, and so making some planning that stretches out a little bit farther makes some sense. I'm going to start by talking about some projects that have recently been completed. These are already in the budget. They were adopted last year or in previous years, but I want to give you an update and to let you know which ones and let the community know which ones have been completed recently. And we'll start with some transportation projects. This is a picture looking north on Pierce, north of Colfax. This is the condition before the project, and here's the condition after. And this one that was actually phased. It's a project funded with community development block grant funds, which are federal funds that the city receives as long as the federal government continues to make them available. And it's in the northeast part of town. And the most recent project included the lighting and the landscaping that you see here. The sidewalk was actually built in an earlier phase using the same kind of funding. In total, this was about a $500,000 project for relative, well, you can almost see the whole project in this photograph. This is a project that in the before condition on the northwest part of town on Robb Street. There was a gap in the sidewalk. The neighbors proposed a neighborhood participation project, a program that you've adopted and utilized for a number of years. And here's the after condition with the curb and gutter and the sidewalk put in place. The third one that I'll use as an example is a capital improvement funded project, and that's a roundabout down at Grant Ranch Boulevard and Crestline. This is a location where a major arterial street was going through a commercial corridor, and then it dropped into a residential area. And the intersection's traffic volumes have been increasing. The crash potential was growing. It was to the point where a traffic signal was warranted. But we looked at other alternatives and chose the roundabout, which you approved in an earlier budget, for a variety of reasons. First of all, it's safer. Roundabouts tend to have lower crash incidents than traffic signals. They're also less expensive in the operation and maintenance side. The investment up front is relatively comparable. It's a little bit more expensive for a roundabout in this case. It varies by location. In this case, we happen to have enough land area to be able to do this project, and we had some really good partners. We worked with the neighborhood, of course, to the southeast. The businesses cooperated greatly, and in fact, Crestline was closed during most of the construction, and it goes through some of the commercial area, and we had talked through that with them ahead of time, obviously. We also had a really good partner in the local metropolitan district, which is the residential area to the north and east. That metropolitan district paid for all of the landscaping in the center of the island, the round island in the middle of the roundabout. Also the landscaping on their side, and they'll maintain both of those as well. So it's been a good partnership. This is right on the edge of Denver, so they, of course, were a part of the discussion as well. This is now complete. This is a project that is actually in its third of 4 phases. The very first phase was the intersection of Colfax and Wadsworth, which occurred a number of years ago. The second phase extended the improvements down to 10th Avenue, also completed a couple of years ago. And then this phase was from 10th Avenue down to Highland Drive. It included the Gulch Crossing that I suspect you've all seen. The transportation improvements included the additional lanes, which show in the left picture here with 3 through lanes in each direction, and the shared use path, 1 on each side, that shows in the upper right-hand picture as well. This has been a joint project between the Colorado Department of Transportation and the city with a fair amount of federal funding. The Colorado Department of Transportation has managed the construction. They also did and paid for the design work. They also did the right-of-way acquisition that was necessary for the project. And the city provided the matching funds and obtained the federal grants to do the actual construction, actually both on this piece and the piece north of 10th Avenue. This piece for construction was about $15 million. The fourth phase is the interchange at Wadsworth and 6th Avenue. It's about a $70 million project all by itself, and it's unfunded. The design has gone well through the preliminary stages, so we know what's going to actually be built there. There's been a long involved public process. As part of the right-of-way acquisition that the Colorado Department of Transportation completed north of the interchange, they also did the acquisitions that are necessary at the interchange area. So it's ready to go. All it needs is a lot of money. And I should mention that there are a couple of opportunities for the general public to contribute to the funding with this coming election. There are 2 propositions that are on the ballot, 109 and 110, both of which deal with transportation funding statewide, but they're very different. I'm not going to go into great detail tonight. I'm probably not the best person to do that, but I'll give you a little bit of an introduction to both. Proposition 109 uses existing revenues that the state already receives, and it reallocates some of those revenues, and it authorizes some debt. It would generate or could fund about $3.5 million worth of projects. Billion, thank you. $3.5 billion worth of, I'm not used to those numbers. Millions feel like a lot of money to me. $3.5 billion worth of transportation projects in the state, using existing revenue, only on state highways. And the list that's been used publicly with this proposal actually has about $5.6 billion worth of projects. So the Colorado Department of Transportation, or the Transportation Commission, the State Transportation Commission, is planning to whittle that down to where the project list fits the anticipated revenues, so the public can have a little better understanding of what could be completed with that approach. The Wadsworth and 6th Avenue project is on the list. It's on the $5.6 billion list. Whether it'll be on the $3.5 billion list, we just don't know yet. Proposition 110, also on the ballot, and this isn't an either or. Each will be voted on by anyone who wants to vote on them. Proposition 110 is different. It does include additional revenue, and it would generate a larger amount of revenue, and there is a project list associated with that it could fund. And that includes state highway work. It also includes funds for counties and funds for local municipalities as well, and all transportation types. So there's a little bit of a primer, and only a primer, on what those will be like. You'll, I'm sure, hear plenty about those in the coming weeks. I'll talk a little bit about a traffic signal in the northeast part of town, 20th and Pierce. This project is also complete and was a project that replaced a very old signal. We have signals in this city that are as old as 50 years old. I don't know the age of this one, but it was on what we call a span wire, the wire that carries the signals across the intersection as you see here. And if you were in that van trying to see the signal that's very close to you, it'd be up really close, and the pedestrian signals weren't good. There were a variety of things that were substandard here. It was completely reconfigured for about $300,000, and it was a joint project with one of our neighbors. A lot of our transportation projects are joint projects, and as I've mentioned earlier, in the Wadsworth projects. There were a couple of planning efforts in the transportation area that you were also involved in this past year. There was a bicycle master plan update. This is only the second time the master plan has been adopted. And it was adopted after public participation and council consideration back, I think, in April. And I want to make a little bit of a plug here because one of the things that has come out of these efforts to improve bicycle safety and automobile-bicycle interaction safety is an upcoming training called Bicycle Friendly Driver Training. It's going to be held on October 2nd right across the plaza in the Cultural Center, and that'll be at 6 p.m. And it's open to the public. You do need to register if you're interested at bicyclecolorado.org. Again, that's October 2nd. The second planning effort was triggered by transportation concerns on the Union Boulevard corridor. And generally, that's the area for this planning purpose from Alameda to 6th Avenue, maybe a little bit north of 6th Avenue. That process was concluded earlier this year as well. It recommended a number of projects that came out of the public discussion and some technical analysis, fairly substantial technical analysis. And you'll actually hear a little bit more about this corridor a little bit later when Mr. Dorr talks about the proposed taper projects. Now let me move into drainage. The stormwater management utility in Lakewood is a separate entity. Just as Mr. Dorr described the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority as being a separate financial entity, so is the stormwater management utility. It collects fees that are then used only on stormwater improvements. The next several slides are projects that were funded from the stormwater management utility. This first one at 17th and Lee was a local drainage problem that was impacting a number of properties in that part of the northwest section of town. And while we don't have a good before picture, this is an after picture with the new concrete and some inlets that redirect some of that water away from the private properties and ultimately into a stormwater system. This little project was about $140,000. The second one was a little bit bigger. This is a before picture. Now, this was a significant storm event. Some of you may remember this picture. This is a backyard. That's a bench in a backyard over in the left side of the picture. There are a number of properties south of 20th, generally around Nelson, that would flood because it was an area that just simply didn't have a place to drain. A substantial amount of money and some sizable pipes went into this area that have since been completed, and it includes a pipe underneath this walk that was then replaced, as well as out into the street where some curb and gutter and inlets and pipe were placed as well. This project, again, fully funded by the Stormwater Management Utility, was about a $600,000 construction effort. One of the other activities of the Stormwater Management Utility is maintenance, and sometimes that's maintenance caused by, or the need for which is caused by major storms, and that's what these photos illustrate. It's a little difficult with the shading and all the vegetation to tell, but these are blockages. The left one is in the channel of, I believe it was Lakewood Gulch near Sheridan, which overtopped in this storm. And so out in the northwest part of town, and then the others in this kind of southwest part of town along Alameda, where some of McIntyre Gulch had structures plugged as well. When there was a very intense storm, actually we had a couple of very intense storms on Green Mountain this year. So that gets cleaned up by funding provided by the Stormwater Management Utility as well. This is the after picture of a grate similar to the one in the middle picture after it was cleaned. This is a different location on Green Mountain that looked very similar to the one in the middle. We also replace infrastructure with the Stormwater Management Utility, and I want to compliment the council over many years of paying attention to dealing with aging infrastructure. We certainly have some of that. These are 3 locations listed here where the pipes had completely deteriorated in the bottom. That usually shows itself on the surface by creating some kind of a sinkhole or a collapse or some other kind of problematic circumstance. In all 3 of these cases, that's what happened. The one on the far right which is actually rotated 90 degrees, was a drainage way, a pipe underneath a private parking lot on the west side of Union, south of 4th Avenue. Now, it's a publicly owned pipe and a public easement, but the easement goes through the private parking lot. So in that case, we didn't dig up the whole pipe. Instead, we used a method where we could line the pipe, essentially create a new pipe inside of the old one. It's not always the best answer, but where you're trying to keep a business open and not obliterate a parking lot for a number of days, this turns out to be a good solution. Moving away from the stormwater management utility for a minute, but staying with the theme of infrastructure maintenance and preservation, the street resurfacing program I mentioned here because we spend a lot of money on it. We have a very extensive street system, spend over $8 million a year taking care of it and keeping it in good shape for the community. And one of the things that occurs, well, there are several methods that we do that. We seal cracks to keep moisture out. We reseal the entire surface to reduce the oxidation that makes the pavement more brittle and more likely to crack. We patch places that create potholes or have the potential to create potholes. We resurface streets entirely at a regular frequency, all of which is designed to ultimately reduce the ongoing cost of maintaining the streets. Because if we let them go too far, then we're to the point where we simply have to rebuild the pavement and they're not maintainable at that point. Some other things happen during street resurfacing as well, and I'll use the example of Jewell Avenue this past year from Bear Creek Boulevard to Yale, where the street didn't get any wider. It was due for an overlay, but because it was being overlaid, that was the optimum time to implement a part of that bicycle master plan that you saw earlier. That section was scheduled to have at some point on-street bike lanes. That was the time to do it. So essentially, for the cost of a couple of stripes, we were able to implement a significant amount of the bicycle master plan on that portion of Jewell Avenue during the resurfacing. I should also mention that there are many streets in Lakewood, many major streets in Lakewood that the city does not maintain the pavement on. Those are state highways: Wadsworth, Kipling, Colfax, Sheridan. The list can go on. Morrison Road, C470, there's others, 285. And their condition is driven by what the state is able to do. One of the next projects that you'll probably see done by the state on resurfacing is Wadsworth from about 5th Avenue south. Now the south terminus is a little undetermined at this point. There's some issues between Morrison Road and Yale that need to be addressed, so it may stop at Yale, it may stop at Morrison Road. But the hope is that within a couple of years, CDOT will have an opportunity to make that a new pavement as well. It's odd to see a water line leak on a photo that says street resurfacing, but we care a lot about those things because when they often happen under streets and they can damage roadways. This particular water line leak was not in a Lakewood water line. It was one of the water lines owned by one of the other many districts in the city of Lakewood. But it was under a street that was relatively newly resurfaced in the last few years. So we got very interested very quickly when we began to see the street having effects. And the water utility that owned the line, which is one of the smaller utilities, wasn't in a position to be able to find quickly where the problem was. So our staff diverted and got involved and identified the location, which is shown in this illustration. And ultimately, the water district did pay the city back for the efforts to find the leak. But it's one of the other things that we try to keep an eye on with streets and all the other infrastructure that is under streets. Another area that you've invested in year after year is making sure that the organization has the equipment necessary to provide the services that it does to the city. And that's not cheap. That street sweeper in the left picture is over $250,000, and that's just one street sweeper. And of course, we have to replace vehicles regularly and equipment regularly at different schedules, and we always evaluate each one individually when it reaches its schedule to see if it's really time or if we can extend that. And occasionally, we've been able to extend the general target schedule as technology on vehicles has improved. I'll shift gears here to projects that are underway. Again, these are projects that have been in the budget before, but I want to give you and the community an update on some of these as well. The first one, we're really a secondary player. We, the city, are actually a secondary player in. It's primarily a Lakewood Reinvestment Authority project, so you'll hear about it some more when you talk about the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority budget here in a little while. But this is Alameda between Pierce and Carr is where the city is involved, although there's work also to the east of Pierce. And then the city's also involved in Teller from Alameda up most of the way to First Avenue, up to the elementary school. And it's a split project, a shared project, actually. That's a better way to look at it, because the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority had things that it wanted to do for the downtown area. The city needed to resurface these streets, the portion of Alameda that I mentioned between Carr and Pierce. We actually deferred, knowing that this other work was coming and it would make sense to do it all at once. And then Teller also is coming up on the list for resurfacing. We did concrete repair at the same time. There was an old signal at Teller and Alameda, so we're replacing it at the same time as part of this project. So 2 funding sources came together, actually more than 2, but those 2 at least, and you'll hear more about that in a little while. Also coming up is changing the southbound left turn lane, going southbound on Kipling to turn left and go east on US 285. This is looking north, and you can see that line of cars reaches Girton, I think. It's well into the through lanes. This has grant money as well. About $520,000 in grant money and about $100,000 is budgeted of city funds to get this project done. We anticipate construction happening in 2019. The next project would add a 3rd northbound lane on Kipling from 6th Avenue to 10th Avenue. Today, when you come off of the ramp from 6th Avenue to turn from westbound to northbound, this is what you see. You have to squeeze over into the 2 through lanes. And then as you go north, there's side-by-side left turn lanes. So the idea here is to utilize some of that space in a different way. There's not a lot of left turn movements on Kipling through this area north of here, north of the interchange. So the idea is to add a 3rd northbound lane. The reason being multiple, but a primary reason is that when traffic is on its way into Lakewood High School, one of the main entrances is from Kipling, because that's the access to 6th Avenue, and it's a right turn onto 9th Avenue and then another right turn into the school property. Well, that school traffic by itself backs way up onto Kipling. It essentially stops the use of that right of the 2 existing northbound lanes. So this 3rd lane would act as an acceleration, deceleration, and frankly a storage lane during school pickup and drop off. Mostly it's a restriping project. The Colorado Department of Transportation is planning to resurface this area, so the restriping would be logically done at that time. There's some concrete work. The road does narrow just at the far end of this picture here, so we'll have to do a little bit of reorientation there and a couple of other locations. There will be some movement or some turn movement restrictions at 8th Avenue if that access is open to the school. We also have grant to replace the traffic signal at 8th Place, so we're trying to coordinate all that at the same time. Primarily a CDOT funded project, but the city is right in the middle of it with our friends at CDOT. This just shows the school markings, and this is at 8th Avenue, so this is the potential additional access into the Lakewood High School property. But without moving the curb line that you're seeing here, we could create the 3rd northbound lane. Let's go to the east side of town, the northeast side of town. This is Sheridan. I'm sure you've seen these pictures at least twice. And I feel bad about that, but it is the nature of the process. This has about $1 million federal grant. Money comes with strings, and those strings aren't all bad. They have very important causes and reasons, but they don't accelerate the process. So here we are looking one more time at the shared use path from 6th to 10th on the west side of Sheridan. Those dirt areas are where people walk near high speed, high volume traffic that we want to solve with the shared use path that'll be separated generally from the curb line. It's about a $3.2 million project. The design and land acquisition is complete. We're almost through the CDOT process for final approval, and that will lead to construction in 2019. There's 3 segments on the W line shared use path. You've spent a lot of time on 2 of those. One from Oak to Kipling, one from Zephyr to Wadsworth. The 3rd one was also in the budget last year, which is a connection between the Garrison Station and Estes Street on the north side. A total of about $3.6 million, all scheduled for 2019 construction. And I want to use this as an opportunity just to mention that the demand or desire, maybe that's a better word, for additional sidewalks and shared use paths isn't declining. We have a list of about $50 million worth, 50 miles of those kind of facilities that people would like to have, probably in the $70 to $120 million range. As you know, we're funding about $500,000 a year plus what we can get in grants and other kinds of projects. That's not based on an inventory of need. That's based on requests that have been brought to our attention. So there's probably more out there if and when we make enough progress for it to be important to go look for more. Another one of those kinds of paths is on Lamar. This is going west from Lamar in the left picture on the south side of 13th Avenue. It's a connection from the recently completed Westline Flats project, which built sidewalk along its frontage over to Lamar where there's a light rail station. There's 3 properties here, 3 private properties. We've had interactions with all of those owners. They know what's coming. They know the reasons for it and are generally supportive. There is acquisition that needs to happen, as you know. It's about a $250,000 construction project. I keep turning 2 slides at once. Traffic signals. There are 2 kinds of activities that happen with traffic signals. Some we replace, like the one on the left, some that I've already mentioned. Some we improve to make them either safer or more functionally adequate for our current control systems. As I mentioned earlier, we have signals that are upwards of 50 years old. Not all of them. The city owns about 120 of those, so we're now in a program which was in the first approved in the budget just last year of replacing about 2 or 3 of those a year. They'll be replaced when they need to be. That doesn't mean we'll always do 2 or 3. Some years maybe we won't need to do that many, but that's the plan. They do cost a lot. New traffic signal can easily be $350,000, so $250,000, and sometimes they can range higher or lower depending on the roads that they have to reach across and other factors. We do have grants for some of these. The 2 Kipling signals both have grants. The 2 Wadsworth signals both have grants that'll pay for about 85% of those 4 signals. And I'll actually talk about the Wadsworth signals a little bit later. I ended up getting them on the wrong slide, so I'll talk about them in a few minutes. Have you seen these in Lakewood yet? As you know, on October 1st, you're going to have a study session that includes an informational discussion about dockless bicycle and scooter sharing. They're a wonderful tool if used well. They're also a troublesome tool sometimes in most communities in one way or another. The dilemma is to try to figure out how to walk the line to where they can be helpful. Scooters began showing up. Well, in fact, here's 2 pictures of scooters in Lakewood, the one on the left at the Lamar Light Rail Station, the one on the right at Colfax. And last week, literally while I was writing the staff memo that you'll get for your packet on October 1st, literally while I was writing it, Lime showed up out here at the transit center right here at the Civic Center and unloaded scooters. So these may have come from Denver, but they are unloaded now in Lakewood. Bicycles I haven't seen yet, but that doesn't mean they aren't here. So we're trying to find out how to maximize the opportunity without having the problems, and frankly, we won't have that answer on October 1st, but it'll be a good time to start the discussion. Let me shift back again to the stormwater management utility with some projects that are underway. And by underway, this may mean the design's underway, it may mean the construction's underway on all these projects that I'm mentioning in this segment. This is the McIntyre Gulch Crossing at Holland Street. It's just north of 2nd Avenue. Some of you may recall a flood that we had that showed water going over the street that caused this kind of damage. This is a project planned for 2019 construction. It's about $1.3 million of construction. These are not inexpensive, and that will reduce property damage, both public and private property damage in that area. Again, it's all stormwater management utility funding. Several other stormwater projects are in the works. We're doing some planning, just initiating some planning in the Applewood area. There's about 6 or 8 different problematic locations that are somewhat isolated, but we want to look at the whole area as a whole and see if we can do things efficiently out there. Weir Gulch, there's a couple of locations on Weir Gulch where we have bank failures, erosion, that our Urban Drainage District actually is funding those improvements. Similarly with Lakewood Gulch in these 2 locations that I mentioned here, the district is also paying for those. Independence Street south of 8th Avenue, you may remember some testimony on this one where there was an irrigation water interest in this location as well. We've been working with those folks. We found a solution that'll work for everybody, so that's being designed right now and planned for 2019 construction. It's about a $575,000 project. 20th and Union is actually the first implementation up in the Applewood area. And you may remember at the end of August, you received a copy of a notice that went out to the folks in that area that we were going to begin the surveys so that we could start on the design work there. The Dry Gulch crossing is is north of 13th Avenue. We're doing that now. It's a little earlier than we'd originally planned because we have to replace a sewer in that area as well. As long as we're going to tear up the road, why replace it twice? Why cause the interruption to the neighborhood twice? It's on the list. We can fund it. So we'll replace that crossing of Dry Gulch south of 13th on Lamar at the same time. That's about a $700,000 project. Here's some problem locations that we'll fix within the next few months. The left one is a pipe that's completely rotted out in the bottom, similar to what you've seen in earlier pictures. Near Beach Park, we've got a sinkhole problem, probably created from the same issue in near Jewel Avenue. And I should also mention that beginning in 2019, we're going to have the equipment to do a routine methodical visual inspection of all of the storm sewer system in the city. So we're beginning to make a stronger shift to some anticipatory replacements rather than reactionary replacements. We do some anticipatory replacements, but we'll be able to do it more methodically throughout the whole system and all across the town with the advent of having camera equipment that we can run down these pipes. As you know, you also manage a stormwater or a sewer utility in a portion of the town, mostly the northern part of town. There's 3 projects listed here that are sanitary sewer replacement projects. The sum total of about $2.5 to $3 million for those 3 projects. We have a water line in the fairly small Lakewood water utility in the northeast part of town. This is a picture of Colfax after the repair was made on the water line. And this is the reason that we need to replace it, is we're beginning to have more frequent issues. And the repairs are not efficient because they're spot repairs and we don't know where the next problem's going to be. And they're expensive. You may be able to tell in this picture that the upper surface on Colfax is asphalt. There's actually a concrete street underneath much of Colfax, and then you've got to dig down to the pipe. So it's not an inexpensive process. So we're going to go ahead and replace this. The existing pipe that's problematic, it stretches all the way from Pierce to Sheridan, so about a mile. But we've looked at the arrangement of the other rest of the system, and we don't think we need to replace all of that. We're working with Denver Water to ensure that, but we think we can replace about 1,600 feet, which is about a third of a mile, and use access from the north and south of other water lines to provide service to those facilities rather than tearing up a whole mile of Colfax. It's still going to be about an $800,000 project for that little utility. Again, planned for 2019 construction. And I wouldn't like to see a mile that torn up. We're working on a master plan for the Quail Parfait Maintenance Campus. This is an older facility that serves the community in a variety of ways. It's located up near north of 8th Avenue. It's the maintenance campus that we've had since the 1970s, at a time when the population of the city was closer to 70,000 than 150,000. The street mileage certainly has grown, so we plow those streets, we maintain those streets, and that's a greater demand on the site. The number of vehicles, our fleet maintenance facilities there as well, has increased significantly since the 1970s. And we've also added some things to the site. In the 1970s, the city did not have a sewer utility, and now those maintenance operations run out of this site. The city did not have a water utility, and those maintenance operations run out of this site as well. And we didn't have a recycling center, and it's been kind of shoehorned into the site as well. So we have a relatively immediate need that I'll mention here in just a minute that suggested that maybe we need to go ahead now and look at a master plan for that area and those services to see what the best way to provide for those is. A couple of the more immediate needs are that the salt storage building has deteriorated. When you put salt up against metal, it's not good for the metal, and that's happened. It's also half the size of what we need. We get our salt from out of state, and we have to fill that thing twice a winter in order to cover the amount of volume of salt that we need for the streets in Lakewood. That works great as long as the trains run at the right time and the salt gets delivered. Well, we've had some years where that hasn't worked out so well. We've also shared the facility to some degree with the school district, which is across the street. One year we had to ask them no longer to use that salt, so they had to travel farther to one of their other facilities to get their material to deal with their parking lots. Another year we had delivery problems because the trains didn't run as quickly as we had hoped. Delivering salt's not the highest priority for a railroad company, and so we need to look at a way to increase the capacity. The second need there is related to vehicle maintenance. Since the 70s, we've gone from about 4 fluids that are needed in the various kinds of vehicles we have to 2 or 3 times that many fluids, so we need that much more storage, and with the additional vehicles that we maintain, that's a challenge. So we're trying to work on a master plan at this point. After we get that, we'll be back to you to talk about what makes the most sense. Finally, to things that are newly proposed in the budget that you're looking at today. And I only have one slide, which is half of what is proposed. And that's 2 signals at Kipling, one at 13th Place and one at 13th Avenue. This picture is 13th Place looking looking west. You can see that it's an offset intersection. The parcel to the left in the near part of the frame is actually owned by RTD and it's vacant. We're hoping to work with them and try to align this intersection so it functions better. But both of these signals are very old and need to be replaced. We have a safety grant that'll pay for about 85% of that. The other 2 are the 2 that I mentioned earlier, the 2 Wadsworth signals at Yale and Girton. Those won't be replaced, but they'll be modified to provide more safe conditions than they do today. I can't remember all the specifics, but that includes at Yale realigning the heads so that they fit with the lanes better, and I believe at that location adding a flashing yellow arrow. So there will be some changes there. And again, that's 80% grant funded. And those are the 2 new project area, actually 4 signals included in the new budget that were not included in earlier budgets. With that, I'll stop my comments. Certainly be happy later to answer any questions, and I'll introduce from the Department of Community Resources, Director Kit Newland.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good evening, Ms. Newland.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. So I'll be doing as my counterparts have, walking through projects and proposed ongoing, completed, ongoing, and proposed. And I'll touch on neighborhood participation projects as well. So first completed, and forgive me, you'll hear some of the same information that I spoke to you about last week since we did the Imagine last week. So I won't dwell on it, but I do want to mention again, Lasley Park was open on August 25th. We celebrated with the community. And if you haven't had a chance to go visit, you should. It's beautiful. And then Lakewood Heritage Center, we did an amphitheater roof replacement there. That was completed in June, just in time for the summer event season. That was funded in 2017, $450,000. And it was a complicated project and difficult to find a vendor, but we did, and I think it's worked out beautifully. Next, I wanted to mention the median beautification. This is one of those projects that was funded by council in 2015, actually, and then we've been working on design and construction since then. So the medians that have so far been completed include Wadsworth Boulevard, Evans to Woodard, Jewell Avenue, Wadsworth to Pierce, Pierce, Jewell to Colorado, Wadsworth, Florida Avenue to Bales. And then still under construction or to be completed are the 2 entries onto Bear Creek Boulevard, one at Jewell and the other at Morrison Road. And then also on Kipling Parkway to be completed is Hamden to Bellevue. So that's still in process. Total cost of this was, it was originally funded at $800,000 and cost will be $860,000. So we contributed some open space funds to that to get that completed, to have those all completed eventually this year. Park path replacements. This was another council funding. We asked for some additional funding to do three of our large community parks, O'Kane, Belmar, and Addenbrook. That was funded in the 2017 budget at 1.2 million. And to date, we've completed both O'Kane and Belmar, and this winter we'll be completing Addenbrook. So all in all, we'll have completed replacement of more than 2 miles of concrete pathways. This is a long time coming. The yellow that you see there is the portion of the Dry Gulch Trail that we have completed. It was completed in June. That's from 10th and Gray up to about Depew Street. And this was a grant partially funded through a Jefferson County Open Space grant. And so was some of the property purchase here. The portion of that trail that you see in pink will be completed by the West Line Village. So, and that project is under construction currently.
That's cool.
We continue to work on tennis court renovations. This year, we've completed South Sims courts. This is South Sims here that you see. And then we also completed Daniels Parks. I mentioned to you previously or last week about the Big Belly, and I think Larry might have mentioned that as well. The smart waste system that we've implemented in 70 sites throughout the park system. We have 100 components, and hopefully sometime mid-year next year we'll be able to give you some data about how this is working out. This is funded in the 2018 budget. 17 for $126,000 a year, ongoing. And then really fun event, the Big Boom Bash. I think many of you were there. Turned out really nicely, and we're really pleased with the event and the positive comments from the community. We did a survey online after the event, and we heard from 333 people, and 91% said the fireworks were high quality or very high quality. So we're thrilled with that. We know that there's some areas that need improvement, and we'll continue to work on those going forward. And here's some projects that are underway currently. I think I mentioned this last week too. The Carmody splash pad has not been working well for several years. It's time to get that replaced. So we're working on a complete replacement of that feature. In addition to that, we're doing drainage improvements at the same time, and then we're going to add an outdoor workout facility with an expansion of the deck there. So that should be a nice addition. That was funded in 2017 at $270,000. We're going to contribute some open space and conservation trust fund of our own conservation trust funds to complete the project. And I mentioned this last week as well, but we are continuing to work on this Glennon Heights pool project. We have some construction documents that are starting to go under design now. And as you can see, kind of in the conceptual there, we're doing a 0 depth entry on the baby pool. You can see on the left side that it's above ground and there's no ADA access. So this will allow ADA access, and the bathhouse will be completely renovated for ADA access as well. This was funded in 2018 for $600,000. Next, the Washington Heights historic building on First Avenue needs some upgrades, and so we requested and received $500,000 in this 2018 budget, and we just completed construction documents. I think they actually received those today. So what we're looking at are a floor replacement in the pottery studio, and masonry work around the whole exterior of the building. There's some plumbing upgrades that need to occur on the interior of the building. And then the other very large piece of the work is an HVAC system. So there's one system on the roof right now that'll be removed, and an air conditioning unit will be placed in each of those rooms. We'll also be adding one office. The staff do not have office spaces there. They're just kind of crammed into a little hallway. So it's going to be an improvement. Yeah, quite an improvement from where we are now. I mentioned this last week as well. We're working on this energy performance contracting with the State Energy Office. We've already completed the Clements Community Center and the Green Mountain Rec Center improvements, and we're working on Carmody Pool right now. Lots of, those are and then the Public Safety Center as well. Those are the last 2 buildings. All of that work should be completed by the end of October. We're very excited about that, and the work is being done very quickly. Public Safety Center, we're looking at upgrades. This doesn't show the drive lane. The drive lane that they've been working on is up against the Public Safety Center. So we were looking at improvements that you see on the left where the concrete had really degraded and we had leaking and so forth. So the drive lane is going to look similar to what you see here, this painted concrete. This project also involves some interior work on the Public Safety Center restrooms and locker rooms. As Dan mentioned, 1984 was when those haven't been touched since then, restrooms and locker rooms. So the police staff are very excited about those upgrades. And then, oh, here we go. Thanks, Larry. Got it in there. I think we had the old one and the new one. This shows you the drive lane and some of those improvements. Oh, here's another one. And then I mentioned also last week the new community garden at Jefferson Green Park. We'll be getting the site prepared, our staff will, this fall. So by spring, the gardeners will be all getting going and working with Denver Urban Gardens to get their plots planted. So really excited about that. And I know many of you and your constituents are very interested in Lakewood's 50th. This is the new logo for the 50th anniversary. The HCA staff have been driving this effort. They've recruited folks from all departments, so we have a big team, and all the feedback that we got originally, I think it was last year or the year before from ACIC, that was what we used to put all of this stuff together. So we're using all of their recommendations, almost all of them, for the activities that we're going to be doing. So I'll have some more information for you, but I can highlight a few things. There will be a new history book. There will be an art exhibit, a public art exhibit at Addenbrook Park, and we're gonna have that out on Lakewood Together for the citizens to vote. So we'll have some submittals and then let people vote on what they like the best to sort of, display or, I can't think of the word, but to show what Lakewood's history is all about. We're going to have all of our events next year will have something incorporated about the 50th. So there'll be some sort of incorporation in, for example, Big Boom Bash and the concert series and all the events that we do, typically cider days and so forth, will have a 50th theme. In November is when we expect, late October, early November, we expect to roll out a lot of information on this, on Lakewood Together about the 50th. So there'll be a lot of opportunities for people to submit stories, to participate in activities and events related to Lakewood's history. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And then regarding the neighborhood participation program updates, I just wanted to give you a brief update on that. This was a connection from Sutherland Shire Park to Main Reservoir that was submitted by the neighbors, and it was completed in January this year, and it's been a nice addition for those folks that live in that area. The Hodson Park, we added a ramp, as you can see on the right there. This was not a good entry into this park. It was dirty, muddy. It was basically muddy and rutted. And now we have nice, easy ways for people to push wheelchairs or go up the steps here. So really nice improvement there. Hilltop Park Playground is, you can see it's on West 22nd. It's laid out, it's a strangely laid out piece of property. So West 22nd is up at the top of that drawing there. This was a park that had only a few little pieces, well, it does still now, but it won't for long, a couple little pieces of playground equipment. It's going to have beautiful landscaping, so when you enter from that north side of the park, it's going to be really beautiful, and then we're going to add some play areas, some really nice landscaping, a new playground, and some shade and seating areas. So it'll be really nice for the folks that live right around there. There's a couple of apartment buildings that older apartment buildings that have been there for a long time, and so it'll be well used, I'm sure. And then 2 of these NPP projects are currently underway. Well, underway means they're in design. So the shelter at Glennon Heights and playground replacement at Ute Trail. We are getting feedback from the community, from the neighbors at Ute Trail. We had 23 people respond to ideas, concepts. They wanted to do that online. So we've had 23 people respond. We gave them 3 choices. So that's how that equipment will be selected. And then these are our new proposed projects, and you all are well aware of the Taylor property. We are requesting a $300,000 for the planning and construction of the site. So as I mentioned last week, we're going to start the public input process towards the end of this year, beginning of next year, and then hopefully have design and construction happening 2019, early 2020, so that we can get people out into the park in 2020. Next, 2 projects that we sort of new park projects. One is the Meadowlark Cottages on South Cody, and the other is what we're referring to based on Denver Water, the Quail Street Park. So this is at 20th and Quail Street. This is the Moffett Water plant property that belongs to Moffett Water. That's how they refer to it. It's owned by Denver Water. It formerly was a YMCA property, and we have just entered into an IGA with Denver Water to get use of a portion of this park for 10 years. So it's a small piece of the property. It's about 3/4 of an acre on the southwest corner of this property, where I'm talking about the Quail Street on your right now, where we'll be able to get neighborhood input about a couple of park amenities. So just throwing out the idea that we might put a playground in, or some fitness equipment potentially for adults, or maybe some Ninja Warrior equipment or something like that. Anyway, so that's one of those projects. And then the Meadowlark Cottages, what we are suggesting or proposing is to take those cottages down. They're not being used the way they were originally intended, which was for children's programs. And now we have an opportunity to potentially take the buildings down and get ourselves a little pocket park there. That again, we would take lots of input from the neighbors about what they might like to see. And we're asking to do those two for $400,000 to make those improvements at both of those sites. But keep in mind, the IGA with Denver Water is 10 years. And then Larry mentioned the fitness equipment. If you visit our rec centers, especially Green Mountain or the Link, you would know that we have very old fitness equipment, in particularly those 2 recreation centers. The fitness equipment that's at the Green Mountain Rec Center was purchased in 1987. And then at the Link, we took Carmody's equipment when we got new equipment at Carmody, and we moved it to the Link. It was purchased in 1989. So, you know, in this fitness industry, things move very quickly. Trends change, technology changes and upgrades. So we want to try to stay up with those trends. And we're requesting $100,000 to upgrade the fitness equipment primarily at Green Mountain Rec Center. And hopefully in future years, we'll be able to get some additional money to do that same thing at other rec centers. And then last but not least, the Carmody Recreation Center gym floor, the picture on the left, this is what it's looking like now. These spots are all over the floor. This is the tartan rubber surfacing that has been there since 1992, starting to peel. So we get a trip hazard, but in addition to that, we also have kind of stinky floor here. The staff scrub and shine and do everything they can, but it's just collected a lot of sweat, yucky tennis shoe stuff over the years. And it's really gross. So what we're proposing is to replace this floor with something that looks similar to what you see on the right. This is a floor that can actually go right on top, and the stink won't seep up through. So, and it will last for a long time. So this $100,000, we can completely replace this floor and get something that will be much more usable and user friendly, and we'll get lots and lots of years out of it. So I think that's my last slide. Without further ado, I'll invite our finance director, Mr. Dorr, back up.
Thank you.
Ms. Newland is always a hard act to follow. I'll do my best. Thank you. Well, if you recall from our agenda, I promised to address something a little bit new that we haven't done in the recent past, and when we've done it, it's been a little different. And that's related to just the last opportunity that this subject came up. This is really the first chance we've had to talk about this, the next step in the process, and that's Council's Resolution 2018-36. And to refresh your memory, so many resolutions, obviously, throughout the course of the year, the key phrase, it's a very long resolution, multiple pages, and it was the result of many public meetings, I can't remember, 6 or 7 or more, and a number of discussions dating back to Council's planning session in February, and it culminated in this resolution, which will lead to a vote on November 6th. I think that's just some weeks away, obviously. So the key caption, though, is excess revenues shall be maintained and presented in a separate budget. And this will be the first step in that direction. Now, across the course of our work on this subject, it was generally proposed that the $12,536,504 in Tabor funds would generally be split across transportation, acquisition of parks and open space, and public safety. And the result was a little different, and that's just great. We can adapt to that in serving you with the ideas and how all of that will work. Now, really, the last time we came close to this or did something similar was in 2005, and that was quite an experience. There was a lot more riding, quite honestly, on that particular election. That was the increase of the sales tax rate from 2% to 3%. And there were two entire budget books produced, and there were a lot of long hours that went into that, I can tell you. And but what it allowed the community to see was really two different visions. I recall Mayor Burkholder at the time describing it quite that way, and that was either the city at a 2% sales tax was going to have reductions, and that was a long process, or with the 3% sales tax was going to restore all of those reductions and do other things. And one of the more memorable things was, well, not reducing the police force, but also adding these signal intersection countdowns and all manner of other technologies. We replaced our telephone system, which now needs to be getting close to being replaced again here at City Hall, and a variety of other things. So we produced two entire books, two separate ordinances, and the second ordinance was conditional upon a yes vote of the people of Lakewood. And so that worked really well. That was, people understood it. Whether you chose to vote yes or no didn't matter. The point is transparent, open, and honest communication, which is, of course, a core value of the cities and that everybody embraces. So the idea is to have public hearings, have decisions, and an ordinance similar to 2005 that would take effect upon a yes vote of the voters of Lakewood on November 6th. So the staff, the budget team, and it really amounts to my three colleagues who just were up at the podium here presented, have sort of reconfigured the spending based on council's wishes, and we propose them to you here tonight. And we would bring along a parallel ordinance at your October meeting, so that would be the 8th and 22nd, separate council agenda item, subject to amendment, requiring a vote, or take 30 days to take effect, et cetera, et cetera. And yet it would be contingent, again, upon a yes vote. But again, it would, I believe very confidently, and I've discussed this with all manners of this with the city attorney, that would constitute, as you put in your resolution, a separate budget. Conditional upon the approval. And then what we would do if that weren't voted up, we could just ignore that and move on and proceed with a refund and so forth. If it was voted up, we would ultimately make it a part of a revised 2019 budget, and we would incorporate it into the existing book in such a way that future generations or somebody in January could look at the budget and see that second ordinance. So I'm going to address each of these very quickly so my colleagues don't have to come back and forth for a couple of slides. And of course, the city clerk will have this presentation out on the website here, I'm sure tomorrow, so that others can see it. And of course, we'll have a public hearing here in a couple of moments. So first, let me address that in the resolution, I can quote $8,500,000 for acquisition of parks and open space. Well, there aren't any particular acquisitions to propose, or I'd be here telling you addresses and negotiations and so forth. But how that would work in such an ordinance would be relative to, frankly, accounting standards and pronouncements that are already in place. These are generally accepted accounting principles, and getting real excited. We've got 5 CPAs in the finance department. I'm one of them. This is our rare occasion to really talk about Governmental Accounting Standards Board Statement 54, which is in the city's financial statement audit. It's a really popular section, no doubt, and it's regarding fund balance reporting. And these are the standards. Our external auditors are looking at these and expecting, to see this. I'll quiz you later on the total number of GASB pronouncements over the years. But teasing on that. But what 54 describes is that there are restrictions that automatically in place. And of course, the constitutional amendment, the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, requires a 3% emergency reserve. GASB Statement 54 implements a restriction of that fund balance. It's easily done. It's described in our audit. It's reviewed by the auditors. And they are amounts that can be spent only for the specific purposes stipulated by Constitution, Charter, external resource providers, meaning creditors, or enabling legislation. Well, your adoption of an ordinance of this kind would be enabling legislation that would restrict those funds in a separate account for just the purpose that the vote would describe. Of course, all of these are hypothetical and contingent upon a yes vote on the coming initiative. So what the ordinance would do operationally, there would be words to this effect, is that there would be a transfer of $8,500,000 from the general fund to the open space fund. And then under GASB Statement 54, there would be a restriction of the fund balance, of course, if the November election were approved. And that would just take place automatically when the ordinance took effect. So that's probably the easiest one of all. Now, what gets difficult is the next step, sort of criteria and identification of potential acquisitions and all of that. And that may take weeks or months or probably years, that type of thing. So that would be the first leg. It's obviously the biggest dollar amount, but that's probably the least complicated. And I don't know necessarily that there's really any decision to make. But next up, I mentioned $2 million a moment ago was to be spent for police equipment and other assets. And what Chief McCaskey and his team have gone back and done, that's different because it would have been closer to the $4 million level, and he's gone back and reconfigured a few things and also looked at his priorities, of course. And he's proposing a SWAT vehicle, $380,000, police agent ballistic equipment, $420, taser replacement, $75, and patrol car light replacement, $285. And this is a good time, I think, to talk about project estimating and project costs relative to their budgets and so forth. You heard Director Newland talk about a recent project and the spending related to it. And of course, Mr. Hutchison, the spending gets very, very large on the projects done in transportation for sure. But even the acquisition of a SWAT vehicle or replacement of patrol car light bars is frankly a sophisticated and complicated, really a capital project. These things come with multiple different accessories. We would, of course, do a request for proposals or a bid for these things. No doubt they will not be $285,000 to the penny. They just won't. And so some of the things to think about related to project costing is, I can tell you, our building managers, our construction managers, our civil engineers, our technology department, they all learn from every one of these projects that they undertake. One of the things that's interesting about being in a non-competitive industry like municipal government is that we collaborate a lot with the state, with the county, and other municipal agencies to really understand product and project costing and what the latest trends are. Now, recently in our bull market in the United States, materials and labor are getting more and more costly, technology as well. So some things to consider. First, none of these projects, but many construction projects will require design, and you have to spend money on design to complete a design in order to estimate the total cost of the project. Well, sometimes it wouldn't make sense to spend taxpayer funds on design on a project that may or may not make the list for city council. So consider design costs. We want to minimize waste, of course. We don't want to spend money on design for a project that's just going to be wildly expensive or something that we just can't complete for the community. Of course, we do have cost escalation. We do have some bidding processes where the cost comes in a little bit too high, but we also have projects that come in a little bit low. So those two things tend to balance each other out over the course of time. And I can tell you our procurement department has been certified as sterling, and we have lots of experience in that team. I can tell you our supervisor of purchasing is a 20-year veteran with Lakewood and 30 years in the profession. So we have good intelligence in our procurement department and in our service departments as well. The other thing that you'll find as well is that oftentimes there are features and benefits in a given project that, typically we throw everything against the wall to try to bring as many features and amenities to the community as we can for a given project, but ultimately we have to eliminate a few of those. But during the job, we might be able to bring one back if something's running below cost, but brings it in just a little bit higher. So that's one of those things is you get opportunities in the field, to do some of those things. Additionally, we have learned about who are really good consultants out there to advise the city on construction projects, technology projects, you name it. And we're working with folks out there who can help us best estimate our project costs. And then also, we have timing and speed, with weather and high use times of year at our recreation centers and golf courses, we have to get projects done sometimes in a very, very tight timeline. So you should wonder, well, what will happen if the patrol car light bar replacement project is the bid comes in $10,000 higher? Well, we may do a few less light bars, or perhaps the SWAT vehicle will come in slightly under budget, and we will manage those things to work so that each of these initiatives gets done. If in the event each of them may be over budget in the thousands of dollars, we may utilize some contingencies to get all of those done so that we can meet the promises that are set forth in Resolution 1836. So thank you for allowing me just a few moments on project cost learning and project cost implementation. Just to use the SWAT vehicle as another example, they're just not lying on an automobile dealership lot. You've got to practically build these things with all manner of technology and lights and sirens, and many of them are virtually custom. So I'm sure you appreciate that. So thank you for indulging me for just a moment there. Also in the police department is an infrared UAV camera, and that UAV stands for Unmanned Aerial Vehicle, or better, more commonly known as a drone. And I'm told by our police chief we now have 2 licensed pilots authorized to use those in the community, and those would be on the list. And next is police agent health and wellness assessment, and I'll take a little moment on this because I learned much in studying the process with the police chief. I became educated on it, and I'll read just a few captions here because I want to make sure I do them justice. The profession of policing, because of shift work, and you know what that means, 24/7, holidays and the whole thing. Sedentary conditions of a patrol car, and if you've done a ride-along, you know how long some of our police agents can be sitting. Stressful situations, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Wear of body armor, and heavy equipment belts. I've never tried on all of that stuff, but it sure doesn't look comfortable. And also, here's something I hadn't thought about, because I work a traditional schedule 8 to 5, but our police agents do not. A lack of convenient access to healthy eating options during overnight shifts. Think about that. That's why they've all got those ice chests, I see, sometimes. So they don't have the convenience of just going to your natural grocers or wherever and having a nice, meal break. That's difficult at 4 o'clock in the morning, right? Okay. So because of this, also think about how the police agent goes from that very sedentary situation to immediate terrifying action, right? That's difficult, that's hard on the body. You don't think about these things, but it's been studied for a number of years. And the United States Department of Labor has determined that the average age for a first heart attack in the United States civilian population, meaning us civilians, the average age is 65. The average age of a police officer suffering a first heart attack is 49. It's age 49. And a police officer is 25 times more likely to die from a heart attack than a gunshot. So what this wellness assessment will do is assess the cardiac condition of the police agents and determine if immediate care is needed, and there have been some of those, or if things can be modified through behavior, lifestyle, nutrition, and other things to help those police agents just be safer, obviously, and more healthy before it may lead to a catastrophic event. We've piloted this program at Lakewood. It's been very popular. We've done this with 50 police agents, and it's a very intense process, meaning it takes time, and it takes engagement of the police agent, and it has been popular. The city of Westminster is doing this. There are a few other cities across the state, and this would enable Lakewood to implement it for its police agents via this ordinance. Next up, license plate readers. I think this is fairly self-explanatory, but this would assist in the stolen automobile enforcement. And you heard Chief McCaskey talk a little bit about his initiatives in that particular area and the effectiveness. And the belief is that these license plate readers, which frankly amount to high technology and cameras and computers and so forth, can read the automobile license plate both on a fixed basis and mobile. And can have some impacts there on that need. Okay, so with that, I'll shift gears to transportation. And these are proposed by Mr. Hutchison and his team. Projects are very, very large, obviously, in the Public Works Department. Some of them can reach the tens of millions of dollars. And we saw that in our work from the spring and summer regarding municipal funding. So here would be 6th Avenue to Union, additional turn lanes, and Mr. Hutchison, I think, talked a little bit about how some of those can work, $150,000. Pedestrian crossing, Florida and Union traffic signal, and he mentioned his collaboration with others. This also is on the border of unincorporated Jefferson County. And then this is one that I think also speaks to my project planning and project spending, and that is a very precise number you almost never see in my presentations. Which is Wadsworth shared use path, $1,036,504. The purpose for that, I'm just going to confess, it's a plug number, which means your resolution says $12,536,504, and so is this ordinance. I think that's obviously the purpose of that. And of course, those numbers may move around in reality as we go through it. So again, those would be the items proposed for an ordinance for your consideration. It would be a separate budget. It would be separate from traditional budget, but adopted in October. And I think that's in keeping with council's intentions to be very clear and honest and communicating at a very high level with the public. The public would be able to see this ordinance. You would be bound to it. The departments would go out and begin they would commence on these projects instantly after the election. So those would be, as I often say, real, not sort of hypothetical and so forth. Okay, so Let me just close up with just a little bit of housekeeping, and then I'm going to address some questions that have come in, some of which have been answered during the course of the presentation tonight. Others have not, and they'll be useful to council and the public. So I will do that. First, let's go through the requirements. We will have a reserve, not less than 3%, so we'll be in compliance with Colorado statute. The charter dictates that we can't borrow money to fund our operations. We have to use reserves or revenue. We're doing that. A city manager shall present the proposed budget by September 15th. That's checked off. That was done on September 7th, so that one's met. The only thing left is really the budget shall be adopted by November 1st. And that's up to you all, as we've got the proposed, and we can make changes as we go along. I would be remiss if I didn't point out that for the 18th straight year, the city has received the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award, and I was honored to have Carrie put the brass up on our wall in the Finance Department conference room to show the purpose of this being that we have a very high-functioning, open and honest, fiscally responsible budget that meets a very high standard of the Government Finance Officers Association. And last and most are really the core community values of the city. Every single thing that we do every day is connected to these core community values. It's so important that when we link the activities of all the divisions, all of the departments, be it sales tax auditing, be it animal control, you name it, every single thing that's described in this budget book is eventually linked to each core community value. We've got it in a matrix format, we've got it in a narrative format, we've got it in our short-term goals, our long-term goals, our outputs and our outcomes, because this is what we're all about. And so it bears repeating. And I know that a few of you have heard that a number of times from me, but I want us to all keep that insight as we proceed with discussions and questions and so forth. So just as a reminder, our next steps would be public hearings. We're not done. We've got plenty to do, and we're excited for additional questions and more discussion on the subject. I know the public will have the chance here in a moment. So if I may, I'm just going to get into some of the questions that have come, and then we'll take any new ones that may have come from from the presentation, from your review since this afternoon.
So I think what we might do is take a break, if that's okay, before we get into questions. So I know there's some folks up here. It's 9:05, so we'll come back at 9:15. So that was a nice 2 hours with the presentation. I think some folks could benefit from a break. Thank you. like to reconvene the Lakewood City Council and Lakewood Reinvestment Authority joint study session at 9:17 p.m. Council chambers. Everybody is present. Mr. Dorr is going to start us off with questions, which will then lead into council conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for that break, Mayor and members of City Council. Once again, Larry Dorr, Finance Director and City Treasurer. Let's see, I got over 60 questions from City Council in the last couple of days, some just as recently as this afternoon, and responded to every one of those, but one that just needed a little clarification. And many of them have been addressed during our presentation here tonight, but I want to cover some others that were not and are sort of some large questions that could be clarifying, I think, for all council members. And first, let me just touch on this one that says, and by the way, let me just warn you, and thank you as well. Your questions all typically included a page number that referenced, hey, I'm reading this and this is my question. That was very efficient for me and for many others who worked on the answers to these. So thank you for that. And in the other instances, it said, I don't see it anywhere, so can you guide me? So that was very consistent and very much appreciated. So this first question, and I'll give the page number so you can either flip back and forth, or even without that, I try to put it into context so you don't necessarily have to be flipping through the pages, because this is sometimes even difficult to turn. So the first question was related to sustainability, which is important, and one of our core community values is the police department has made a reference on page 345 to the implementation and use of alternative fuel vehicles. And the question is really for what purpose and how will that be done, was the question. And I hadn't had a chance to respond to everyone on this, so I want to take that first. And what I've written down here is that the police department will attempt to implement alternative fuel vehicles for non-emergency roles when possible. Examples would include the victims assistance team, animal control, and other public services when police pursuit would not be necessary. So, of course, when we think of our police department, we all think of the black and white patrol cars. They all have lots of horsepower because they're very heavy too, carrying all the equipment and technology as well. But we have a lot of, may I say, non-emergency or critical emergency vehicles in our police department, and our chief is mindful of that and has made that reference on page 345. So there's that. So I'm going to go through the others that weren't necessarily addressed during this presentation. So these really started coming in last week, and this first one is related to where is the information located for any loan relative to the Green Tree Metropolitan District? And so the question is, I've learned that the city gave a loan of $3 million to Green Tree for the Cloverleaf. I'm paraphrasing this just a little bit, but that's an intersection at C470 in Alameda. Has the loan been repaid? And if not, where is that in the budget? And has Lakewood loaned money to a metropolitan special district? And there's a little bit of a history behind this, and so bear with me. In 2006, the Lakewood City Council approved an agreement with Jefferson County to fund efforts for the interchange. By the way, the word efforts is appropriate because the first major step in that intersection was an environmental evaluation that was very complicated and lengthy and rather pricey. Jefferson County committed $6 million and Lakewood committed $3 million. No reimbursement for the costs were anticipated in the agreement, and there were no provisions related to that. It was recognized, this interchange, as a benefit to the county and the cities and both entities' residents. And the Lakewood transportation system, as it would provide relief to the Union Corridor and the Union and 6th interchange. Because we have lots of vehicle traffic in those corridors, this intersection would benefit Lakewood residents, and hence the investment, which was made from the Economic Development Fund. Later, in 2007, the Green Tree Metropolitan District was formed and committed to manage the construction of the interchange, and the owner committed the remaining necessary funds for the interchange, which was an additional $10 million. So that's a $19 million interchange, and it's you can see it literally from a mile away. Obviously, if you've been over there. So Lakewood entered into a subsequent agreement with Green Tree Metro. I've sent those two agreements to all city council members, and anybody in the public can see those. The agreement didn't change the funding. However, the city successfully negotiated a potential reimbursement of the cost contingent on certain events. The agreement includes a provision that the districts will reimburse the city if at such a time in the future bonds are issued that related to necessary construction of the site that covers the Metro District, a reimbursement would be made. Properties within the district today are undeveloped and the districts have not sold bonds. Therefore, the city has not been potentially reimbursed. However, this is not an unpaid loan to the city. It's a contingent reimbursement. So there's no reference in the city budget book, and it does not constitute a loan. The city's external auditors are aware of this agreement. They've reviewed it as a part of all of their council action reviews, and it is appropriately not presented as a loan on the city's books. And the city has not ever made a loan to a metropolitan district. So none are presented in the budget. So thank you for that. That was a bit of a long-winded answer to, frankly, a complicated and long history question as well, but it's not present in the budget and it wasn't covered in our presentation. So thank you for indulging me and allowing me to get to that question and answer. The next one is a bit of an update, and I think the city council members might be aware of this, but let me talk a little bit about the Taylor property. And you'll recall at the time of the acquisition, the city had applied for certain grants from Great Outdoors Colorado and the Jefferson County Open Space to receive grant funds from both of those agencies. And so here's an update. And because on one end, this is something not received, then you understand why it's not on the budget. But on June 14th of this year, the Great Outdoors Colorado Board denied the city's application for grant funds. However, the city has received a grant award of $1,650,000 from Jefferson County Open Space, which will be received by the city over a 2-year time frame. Currently, we're working on the process of having an open space reversion deed placed on the property so that if at such a time the city council or the people of Lakewood voted to convert that to something other than open space, then the land would convert back to the ownership of Jefferson County Open Space. That's a complicated process. We're working on it. Once that's complete, the city will receive its first sum from Jefferson County Open Space, and that is expected this year. So thank you for that question. I got another question on just the kind of the big picture, the context of the Community Development Block Grant, and it is a very meaningful source of income to the city, and we do good work in Lakewood with the Community Development Block Grant, and so I felt it was important to just raise that up to all of council and the community as well. The fund, the block grant, is expected to be consistent for the next several years. But I'm understanding that as the targeted areas are increasing, that the CDBG areas may lose the funding. Should this item be considered and seen as stable? And that's a good question. We do all manner of things with our Community Development Block Grant, and I won't repeat it for City Council because you approve the 1-year action plan via ordinance every year, and you know the details of it, so you know the importance. And someone who's watching tonight can go back and look at that and have a better feel for it. But what I wrote in response is it would be prudent for the city to recognize this funding source, like many others, is vulnerable in the long run. Federal administrations, frankly, have been hot and cold on the program over the years. But however, that said, the city's been receiving the Community Development Block Grant since 1974. So it can be assumed that this will continue for the next number of years. It was mentioned as the targeted areas increase, quote, in the question. And what that means is the number of eligible areas across the country is growing, right? But the pie is not growing, right? So the slices have to get smaller. So it's diluting the amount of available funding, potentially for Lakewood. But we don't think that this will be material in the short run. But over the long run, that could be challenged. And I do recall an era some years ago, particularly during the Great Recession, when federal administrations had in mind that that could very well be a thing to cut entirely across the United States. And that had my attention, and I think it had the attention of many finance administrators across the country. Many communities have lots of leverage, meaning borrowings, against those grant funds. So there was a question here. I did talk about it just a touch regarding reserves. And it said if the city were to increase its reserves, and I did talk a little bit about saving for a rainy day. How does that happen, and how would it best occur? So the question is, if the city were to increase its reserves, where would that money preferably come from? And what we've done over the years, it's grown due to surplus revenues. Or savings from annual appropriations. That's how that happened for more than 10 years straight. Detailed question, Chief McCaskey talked about his community service officers and police agents. Those two initiatives in this budget are $550,000 a year. And the question is, does this cost include long-term liabilities? The reason I wanted to touch on this is that there's sometimes a misperception of pension costs because many police officers, firefighters, state patrol troopers are in a defined benefit pension plan, and our Colorado Public Employees Retirement Association is struggling. You're probably reading about that, but our workers at City of Lakewood do not participate in such a defined benefit pension plan, but rather are involved in more of what is called a 401k style, where the worker puts in a portion of their earnings, the city puts in a portion of their earnings, and they're invested in a style of investments at the choosing of the worker. So we don't have those long-term pension liabilities, okay? Another question that came up a little bit earlier and we addressed this partially was when additional money is budgeted for equipment and vehicles, are additional funds budgeted for replacement, and how much? Well, our two CSO vehicles are $90,000. These vehicles are equipped with all the lights and radios and all those things necessary to get the job done. They're not inexpensive. They're also capable of hauling a lot of equipment. And you can see that funding is described on page 519. Small detail question, but it's worth answering, and I found this interesting. Does the city currently pay for police agent vests? And the answer is yes, and Chief McCaskey talked on it just a little bit. Each police agent vest is $800 for a primary protective vest. So I'll touch on that. Here's another one that Mr. Hutchison and others have been working on for a number of years, and there are funds. There is a large number in this budget for a slash facility. So I think it was a good idea to address this question. It's my understanding that we have not located a slash facility. Is that correct? And if so, will the monies be carried forward? And the answer to these questions are no, a site has not been located, and yes, the money will be carried forward. And this remains a priority for the community. We will actively search for an appropriate site. But the follow-on question was, could these funds support special collections of yard debris? And those are two different activities. Collection of yard debris is an annual activity. It's an annual program. Slash facility, we have, I believe it's 1.5 million waiting for an acquisition. So that's just a one lump sum, and we don't want to dilute that by spending on an annual collection. That can be done separately. Okay. Let me see if I've got a couple of others. Here was one that relates to this building that we're in. Question I particularly wanted to address because this came from a constituent through a council member. Lakewood City Hall was acquired through lease purchase many years ago. Were the additional buildings in the Civic Center complex acquired the same way? What's the current ownership status? Are they owned by Lakewood? If not, when did these agreements complete? And I think that the author of this said Lakewood City Hall, and I think that person might have been referring to, as Chief McCaskey pointed out, one of the original city halls was is now the Public Safety Center building. All offices, all administrative offices were in there. And that was acquired through lease purchase in the 1980s, and it's been paid off, and that building is wholly owned. But in 2001, the city was leasing a lot of space over in the Iron Gate complex and elsewhere, and completed this Civic Center project. And that also was completed with proceeds from lease purchase. And those obligations will be retired in December 2020. And at the moment, the buildings are being leased by the city from the Lakewood Public Building Authority, which is an independent board whose sole purpose is to assist the city in the financing of public buildings. They meet once a year, it's a public meeting, and really the authority functions as a pass-through. They don't have any employees, they don't have any expenses. All they have is the money coming in from lease payments from the city, and then obligations to the certificate holders, and that's that. But these facilities will be paid off in 2020. I did get a question on the Tabor refund amounts, and I appreciated the candor of the question. It says, is this just a guess on what we may be refunding, or are we using a formula? It's a mix. Quite honestly, it's a mix. We, of course, understand the formula for Tabor very, very carefully, and there are a few key variables, and I got to tell you, it's a very, very tricky thing to do. This is one of the areas that was challenging for us in our last year. We originally budgeted, I think, somewhere on $6.5 million for a Tabor refund for 2017. We revised that estimate up in the first, just after year end at 8 million, and then it came in at 12. It's a very tricky thing to do. The main reason is the Tabor cap is dictated by two factors. One, the Denver, Aurora, Lakewood CPI, and two, local growth. Now, local growth is a variable that is provided to us from the county in November. So the 2018 Tabor refund, we need that variable, which is in our budget, but we don't get that until November, so you can understand the dilemma. It's very, very tricky. And I will tell you that local growth has been quite dynamic in Lakewood. I don't have to tell you that. You know that. So the number is going to be very difficult to estimate. So we understand the formula. We make our best guess, and I think it's a very educated estimate. So that's what we're doing there. On page 452, and seeing that page number, I realize I'm not doing a great job of calling out the page numbers, but hopefully I'm speaking at the right context. What is the number and name of agencies that the city is in revenue sharing agreements with? And the numbers are large. The numbers are larger, so I appreciate the question, and we'll I think we'll add these words to those pages in the future so that can be more clear. But just two, and I'll talk a little bit about the city's philosophy on this over the years in my LRA presentation, but the two districts are the Denver West Metropolitan District, and you know where Denver West is, which is effectively the Colorado Mills. That was voter approved, by the way. And then also the Plaza Metropolitan District, which is effectively Belmar. So we're sharing revenue as a city to really fund those two projects at the end of the day. And they're funded from the revenues that are created on site at those projects. Okay. I think it'd be useful for the public to know, there was a question here on the council budget. And, the council has a budget of nearly $500,000 for a variety of different things. First of all, we track the amount of money that's paid to city council individually, and then there are trainings and other things that occur on behalf of city council. And the question was, there's a $50,000 difference. What did we spend it on? And I appreciate the inquiry because this relates to things that actually council is doing itself. But it goes back to what I described. Oftentimes there are things that aren't spent throughout the course of the year, but the city council wants to have the ability to spend those in a subsequent year. So we may have a budget for travel that's $50,000, only $25,000 was spent. I'm making these numbers hypothetical. But the $50,000 is reappropriated the very next year. And so those funds are available. I've got a question on art space as an update because there's not really any narrative on that, wasn't in our presentation. Where do I find the update? Has the project officially died? And I'm just going to read this, what was written by my colleague. The city anticipated receiving tax credits for the project to be issued by the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority. This process took a fair amount of time, and unfortunately the tax credits were not granted. Because of this change, a reevaluation of potential locations for the project can occur as a next step. So it is not dead. It's in process. It's been ongoing, I know, for a very long time, but the money is there, and it's really just a matter of one door has closed and it's time to open another. Okay? I've got a number of questions on Tabor, but I think I addressed those in this contingent ordinance. And got a question on page 437 regarding the comp plan and $235,000 for implementation. The question is, what are we implementing? This is money budgeted for citywide identity and placemaking initiative. Among other items, this initiative includes new city entry signage, bridge identification, and wayfinding. So implementing the comp plan. Okay. I got a question on the McIntyre Gulch project on page 497. Question reads, where is this project on McIntyre Gulch? And the answer reads, the Holland Street crossing of McIntyre Gulch will be reconstructed to increase its stormwater capacity and reduce damage to public and private property. It is located between 2nd Avenue and Ernst Avenue for that particular project. I did get a few questions regarding JeffCom, and I just want to perhaps summarize those in a little bit of a narrative. First, there was concern about the drop in the personnel number in the police department. And the question was, I thought we were adding agents. We lost 30 people in our police department. What's going on there? And that's a good question. But all of the workers that were dispatchers at the police department communications center, they've all transitioned their employment to an outside agency. So we've appropriately reduced our full-time equivalent workers in the police department, and those people have made a very brave and difficult transition to this new regional communications center. And it was noted by the police chief that we are saving some funds related to that. Yet, we are budgeting for a slight cost escalation. Now, the city is a part of the board, and obviously has a very keen vested interest in the financial operations at JeffCom, and we're monitoring that very closely. And we don't anticipate that we'll have any kind of an automatic increase of that level, every year. But it was a good question, and it was a major initiative. The technology and the human resources dimensions were just quite immense in getting that done earlier this year. I've got a question on medians. And Director Newland, she showed you some of the medians that we're doing, and she talked, I think, a little bit about the cost, but they're very expensive to construct and also to maintain. And I learned something about planting and the width of these that we can do here, and I'm grateful for that. But the question is, the medians from Wadsworth, south of 26, look shabby. Are they planned for improvement? And the answer is these medians were painted concrete, are painted concrete due to their narrow width. Generally, a minimum of 4 feet width is necessary for the planting to see success with landscaping. Nothing is budgeted or planned for these medians. Okay, just a few more. I got a question on Metal Art Cottages. What park use will be accommodated? And Director Newland talked a little bit about this project. Why not similar size parcel at Maple Grove Reservoir Trail? And the response was, park uses will be driven by neighborhood input. Why not similar size at Maple Grove? We have previously identified Metal Art Cottages property as an underused site. The cottages no longer serve their original purpose, and the buildings would be costly to renovate. Renovating a property into a pocket park offers better use than having the building sit empty, and this can be done with a relatively small budget. I appreciate the word relatively because we're talking hundreds of thousands, but in the big picture, compared to some of our regional projects, that is indeed limited. A question was on the Holbrook Pond project, and what is it? Irrigation pumps are getting negatively impacted due to the amount of silting in the upper pond. Dredging the pond will clear out much of the silt to provide better efficiency for the pump system. So I know that we've had some comparable projects and that those have been received favorably by the community. Okay, I got some questions that I think big picture would be, probably important for all council members, and it has to do with a particular memo on page 29 from the city manager, and this is related to a resolution adopted in 2005, which was contingent upon the approving vote of the people of Lakewood. The budget proposes to take the reserves down from $30 million to $16 million at the end of next year. That's a big difference, right? Especially based on what I just showed you. This is a reduction of half. I'm alarmed. It indicates that we're overspending revenues significantly. And referenced in the memo is that these are special circumstances and or some sort of emergency, and is that defined? So let me address that. Each year, the city has unspent appropriations. We've had that very consistently. Can't overspend our appropriations, so we're cautious a bit. And it's a reasonable percent, but a reasonable small percent of $115 million and amounts to a large number. So it's common to have contingencies and to expect underspending. Over the last 5 years, the general fund has averaged an unspent appropriation of $6.7 million. And so the lowest of the 5 years was $5.7 million. So I think I can say pretty confidently that I believe we'll have unspent appropriations in this 2019 budget and that those reserves won't reach that level. Of course, that is subject to change. We've had a long bull market in the country and in the world, and things could change very soon. But the alternatives, we're not proposing utilizing those reserves for some list of projects that we could otherwise not do or delay or what have you. These are really, this would be a use of reserves for operations. But again, we have those opportunities for savings in the future. I also touched on our accuracy of estimating revenues. Now that's where you could get some concern. If you had a lot of volatility in estimating revenues, you could get concerned about a surplus or a deficit, as it was related to reserves. And the alternative, frankly, is to reduce services. It doesn't make sense to do that because during 2017, and I also wrote here, the city's operating revenues in the general fund exceeded spending by $211,000. So last year, had we not transferred funds for things like Lasley Park and a number of other initiatives, we would have added $211,000 to the reserves as opposed to spending the millions on the list that I described. Okay? Here's a question on the mill levy, and I didn't quite touch on it in my budget ordinance for Tabor. The question is, on the section discussing mill levies, we would reduce our mill levy in 2017, which has been done, for the Tabor refund. Does the mill levy automatically return to the 4.7 the next year? Could the same thing be done with a reduction in sales taxes for 1 year for a Tabor refund instead of a mill levy reduction? So, thank you. Each year, the City Council has to recertify the mill levy. And that has to be done by December 15th, so it's typically done in concert with the budget ordinance. The mill levy allows the city to accurately calculate the amount of refund because we know the assessed valuation of the community. We know that as it's certified to us from the county, and we're able to do that in time. We get that from the county in November, and council authorizes a reduction equivalent to the refund. Sales taxes and the amount of sales subject to tax from year to year vary. So if it's impossible to know how much to reduce the sales tax rate in order to accomplish the refund. So if we did an estimate and thought we could reduce our sales tax by 0.25% for the next year in order to accomplish the refund, but sales somehow went down, we wouldn't be refunding enough. Or if they went up, the city would be refunding too much. So those being prospective, very, very difficult to do. I got a question on the strategic plan, and it was related to Belmar. And the question is, when does PIF run out, and how much money will that mean for the city? And let me just address that. First, regarding the PIF, the owners of the Belmar project, they can keep the PIF in place indefinitely. It's a privately imposed fee. It's a legal fee. They have the ability to do that. The city can't regulate it. However, the city has waived part of its sales tax at the Belmar project. And that waiver will terminate in April of 2027. Well, we're doing the 2019 budget, so we've got a few years to go before we really need to get concerned about that. So you don't see that sort of prominently displayed in our budget. Okay, just a few more, promise. There was a question on grant funding for sidewalks. Does the city of Lakewood match these grants? The answer is yes. We've got a project right now in our budget that is calling for a $2.2 million city match to construct the Sheridan Boulevard sidewalk, a very, very notable project, and I believe we're going to be breaking ground on that still yet this year. Tobacco products tax is really going down. Are we having fewer sales? That's correct. And that's been happening for a number of years. I think a lot of people are using perhaps tobacco-like products that are not subject to that tax, so that could be a big part of it too. So just beware of that. Okay? Well, let's see. I got a question on heritage, culture, and the arts spending. And there are some interesting things happening in the HCA. And I got a couple of questions. I'm just going to put them together. First, it was regarding the variance, and the spending has increased for one year versus another, and why. There are a few interesting and significant projects going on. First, the caretaker's cottage at Heritage Center is being renovated and updated, and also the Art Line project is in this budget as well, and those are both interesting and meaningful changes. I also got a question about the transfer from the general fund to the HCA, and is this normal? And the answer is yes. The reason the HCA is in its own fund is it receives special revenues via a grant from SCFD. And so it's segregated in a separate set of accounts. I got a question on the change, or a very large appropriation on page 489 for land acquisitions. That's related to the Taylor property. I know that you'll all recall that. And just a couple more. How many roof inspectors were added for the hailstorm? Approximately 5 temporary roof inspectors were utilized. And then last, Lakewood paid for school signals on page 404. How many did we put up? 2 rectangular rapid flashing beacons, 1 in each direction of travel at Wright Street, and they're associated with Dunstan Middle School. So there you go. That's some of our spending related to school traffic safety. Mayor and Council, thank you for your patience. Thank you for your questions. There were probably, I think, 10 pages of responses that my colleagues and I put out in the last couple of days. Thank you for your attention to those. I think it's time for the public to have a word or two on all of this, and I'll be available for any questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Nobody has signed up to speak. Anybody wish to speak? No public input will be taken at this time, and thank you again. Thank you to council. I think that sums everything up. We can go home at almost 10 p.m. Right? So let's start with questions and comments. And as you can imagine, we went through quite a few, but people probably still have some more. And, you know, I want to make sure everybody has a chance to speak. So if we can ask a few or say a few things and move on, that'd be great. Ms. Franks.
I actually don't have any questions. I really appreciate the long lead-in time where we got to ask all of our questions. Also, I wanted to comment mainly for the community that this document, of all 500 plus pages, oftentimes I would have a question that would be answered a few pages later or in another section. So it is one of those things where you have to kind of keep going and digest an awful lot of information. I also wanted to comment how much I appreciate the level of detail that was gone into tonight by all the various departments. I appreciate seeing the photos. I appreciate hearing the numbers. And as a project manager, I appreciate hearing the project management processes and best practices that are applied. It's easy when you say, well, the money came from this other area, but we know how much care goes into that. I was definitely cross-checking all those things in the book to see where those funds came from. And as a professional project manager, I really just had comment to say how much I appreciate this level of detail and the level of transparency that we put into our financial documents. So no questions because they've all been asked and answered. Thank you.
Well said. Thank you. Mr. Abel.
Thank you. A very in-depth job, both with the budget and tonight's presentation. First thing I want to say is that as I was going through the budget, I hit page 473. And after bullet points, dollar signs, pluses, minuses, pinpoints, arrows on page, what did I say it was? 473. I find a couple of smiley faces pointing to the projects in question. After all of those 400 pages, I needed the relief. So whoever put those smiley faces on there, thank you for the chuckle. Mr. Dorr answered a lot of my questions. Y'all will be disappointed that there are a dozen questions I'm not going to be asking tonight, and I apologize. However, last week I mentioned the storms we've had and that we didn't have time to talk about stormwater. I'm going to briefly get into that now. When we increased the stormwater fee in 2014, it was presented in large part as an attempt to raise enough money to float revenue bonds to more aggressively tackle our stormwater problems. 4 years ago, that was our intention. We haven't done it yet. Why?
Thank you. I think earlier this year, Mr. Hutchison had facilitated a council study session on the subject, and I believe this is relative to North Dry Gulch and an option. There are two ways to alleviate the stormwater problem in that area of Lakewood. And the idea is to have an open channel solution or an underground channel solution. And what Mr. Hutchison and his team are doing is reaching out to those property owners that could be affected. Once he has a recommendation and I think a good direction from the community, he'll bring that back to City Council. And at that time, City Council will have the opportunity to, as Mr. Hutchison puts it, accelerate those large projects, and they could be accelerated through the issuance of bonds and a much quicker construction. And I think there will be the possibility at that time, once the opportunity to borrow arises, to gauge the size and scale of the amount of money that could be borrowed by the utility, and then the utility could potentially do additional smaller projects. It doesn't make sense to issue bonds in the amount of $500,000 or $1 million or even $5 million. Those projects, they get very expensive to finance with bonds, which the council has the authority to issue on behalf of a utility, but rather to do a larger scale group of projects with bond proceeds. And I think Mr. Hutchison will probably have some guidance on that sometime before the end of the year, but he'll certainly update you if that timeline changes.
5 million doesn't even come close. I think North Dry Gulch alone is $31 million, Mr. Hutchison. Which brings up another question, and that is, and I'm impressed with the amount of what we call local projects, drainage projects. Those are generally neighborhood issues, and we've done an impressive amount of those, but still we're spending something in $300,000 a year on neighborhood projects, local projects, and it would seem that if we accelerate some drainage work, we could add some of those smaller projects to it that cause just as much damage in a more localized area. In fact, I think in the last couple of storms, we had a lot more stormwater damage in neighborhood areas than along North Dry Gulch and Dry Gulch because of the previous work that's been done on those drainages. I recall when water would stand in the middle of Colfax and flow into the front door of Kmart. So we don't do that anymore. And that's as far as the police budgets go, the JeffCom went up 4%, and I saw an explanation of that. We don't expect a 4% increase in our contribution to that every year.
No, we don't. You know, one of the things happening with JeffCom is the leaders are, this is still a new function, and they're really getting a really good idea of efficiencies and workload and staff necessity and all those kinds of things. So I think you could believe that the early escalation is conservatively high so that there's enough money to make it all work. But I think you could expect over time to not see a continued compound growth rate of that size. That wouldn't be sustainable. But they need to get their efficiencies together and get, I think, a year or two under their belts in full. It's just been, I think, about 6 months as we're sitting here. So as they're preparing their upcoming budget, we need to do the same thing. And we're just going to see where that goes. And I can tell you that if our contribution increases, but the money is completely unspent, I think Chief McCaskey would expect the contribution to either decrease or not grow.
Thank you. And I heard your explanation of the shortcomings in predicting Tabor. Any idea how much we expect for this year?
Well, I can tell you what's budgeted in the general fund, and I can stand behind that. I think that's a fair and reasonable estimate and represents again, our best look, $6,283,000, page 145, and I think that's our best educated estimate.
Thank you. That should cover everything so far. Thank you.
I'd like to follow up on the stormwater question. So to be clear then, when we were talking about the Dry Gulch project in the $30 to $35 million range, but there is potential to actually increase that bonding to do more localized projects. It doesn't have to be set for one large project?
Yes.
Okay, well that's good to hear. And then is there an opportunity when looking, I see that we have the master plan, and it probably, considering some of the constraints you said that the shops have, could the slash facility be part of the potential master plan of the shops? If that is something that, I mean, we have the recycle facility, so I don't know if we're too constrained already and it might not work, but it could be an opportunity.
We can sure look at that. I think the issue is land mass.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because that's pretty intensive use as far as you need a lot of space considering what comes in.
Mm-hmm. We've been looking for about 10 acres.
Wow.
10, 12. So, yeah. And that site itself right now is pretty condensed. So
Probably less than that right now, I imagine. Anyways, that's cool. That answers my question. Thank you. Mr. Bida.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of questions. I want to follow up on that, on your answer, Mr. Dorr, about the special circumstance and and the $6 million more or less that as I understand it, you anticipate a spending shortfall, so to speak, where that you're not going to spend up to $6 million a year, and that's been pretty consistent. So is that what you mean by, and I know it's the city manager's letter, but is that what you mean by a special circumstances? Is that what you're referring to as the special circumstance, which allows you then to treat it the way you do in the budget?
That's just it. And the context, if I could take you back to 2005, was that a base budget, revenues and expenditures should be equal. That became impractical over the years because what was happening, what's led to the situation just 2-3 years ago, was that whenever we worked up a budget where revenues were equal to expenditures, and then we had that savings, we were just increasing the city's reserves by $3, $4, or $5 million per year, which was very prudent in those first 10 years, but that became unsustainable. It wouldn't make sense to continue to grow the reserves of the city. At the same time, there was an intersection of need in the community to add to our police force, which we've done some 20 plus or more personnel during that period of time, to where now those two things are coming to intersect. We're still seeing a very consistent, as I said, $6.7 million in annual savings. 5.7 was the low during that 5-year period. So that's what I mean by that special circumstance, is that we can accomplish those services without just adding to the reserve each and every year.
Okay, I get it. So then as a follow-up then, and this is probably an accounting principle kind of thing, why wouldn't you just reduce your spending in the areas that would correspond to the 6.7 million? Why wouldn't you just reduce that and transfer it to other areas like public safety or whatever, to basically balance the budget without worrying about having to take the excess and go to reserves? Because now it seems like it's just the opposite. We're anticipating that we're going to be drawing down the reserves. I mean, it's saying that, and yet that's what you're telling me is that's really not true, but that's what the budget says. So why wouldn't you do it the other way?
Certainly could be. I think from a practical standpoint, not accounting, not a finance standpoint, but from a practical standpoint, what we find is that the savings comes from different areas and different departments and different initiatives in different years. And so it would be difficult if we get all the way down into the line items of each department, each division, each program, and said, geez, if we could just put a negative number in there of 5%, then we would show something. But the problem is that's very difficult for a management team to do that is performing their strategic initiatives. Some departments will need 100% of their appropriations. Others will need 90%, and that's how that intersects at the 95. And it's a very fluid process that I've studied for a number of years.
So it's kind of unpredictable where it's going to come from year to year.
Indeed.
Okay.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, and then my second question is, if I'm understanding, eventually we're going to be asked to pass a bill here when we get ready to approve this budget. It's not only going to be a budget for 2019, but it's going to be a revision for 2018. So it's going to be in kind of two parts. Is that correct?
That's right. And if you want to have a look at what that draft ordinance looks like,
Yeah, I looked at it.
it's presented in there about 519.
Yeah, I've got it. I do. And so my follow-up question then, Mr. Dorr, is this. I noticed that for 2018, we're looking at $28,560,000 of additional adjustments or authorizations for anything over $50,000. And so we're looking at a fairly substantial amount there. The original budget amount was $77 million, and then we're going to increase that by $28 million in change. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm wondering about is this $28 million, and I realize it goes through several pages there under the adjustment authorization. How much of that's already been spent? So that if we were to say, well, no, I don't think we don't want to appropriate, or we don't want to approve that $28 million, how much of that's already been spent?
Okay, thank you. Yes, by the way, for the audience, may I just refer everyone to page 517 if you'd like to see what Councilman Beta is referring to. You'll see that number there. You know, one of the things about the schedule of purchases 50,000 and greater is our attempt to be as transparent and descriptive as possible ends up causing just sometimes the kind of confusion that you're describing. So for example, there are many things listed here that the original authorization, sometimes for a capital project, funds get carried over. So in other words, up front, we're going to do a project that's $1 million. We're committed to the public. We've had lots of public engagement. We have the cash in the bank, and we're ready to do $1 million project. And we do an authorization in one particular year, or we do it for $200,000 in year one and $800,000 in year two, or the inverse sometimes, because construction can take many months, and we need to match up the checks dispersed, to the project spending and so forth. So what I think you'll find, if we went down into the details of these, I think couple hundred line items we've probably got here, I think you would see typically, particularly where the largest numbers are, you would see that there are project carryovers where the timing of a project either can advance or delay or what have you, and those numbers need to be carried over. Quite honestly, from the first authorization, if we just did the first authorization and the full amount, it would never come back the next year. But we attempt to give the public some idea of what's going on with that existing project and just provide the public a little bit more detail. But you can very much see some big changes. The other thing is, if you just think about the Taylor property alone being $7 million, I mean, it was, council's already given the authority, already given the authorization. We're just putting it in here so the numbers can all tie out, but that's probably 1/4. Well, it is 1/4 of the 28 million that's in that column. It just wasn't in the original 2018 budget. Council took action earlier this year. We want to describe it here. We don't have to, but it makes sense to have a document that has, that particular instance, and there are others similar in terms of timing. So I appreciate your attention to this, but I can tell you that generally it has to do with project timing, things like this. For example, I think we have in this 50,000 and over item our postage, because we spend more than $50,000 a year on postage. It's very consistent from year to year. It doesn't change much. So hopefully that's a couple of examples that can illustrate that.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councilor. Great questions. All right. Anybody else? Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. Kit, you mentioned the 20th and Quail regarding the water project that we're having in IGA, and it would be for 10 years. Then what do you anticipate after that time?
Ms. Hodson, will you direct that, please?
Sure. Kit, would you come and answer that, please? Thank you.
Nice job.
Thanks. That was hard.
The property's owned by Denver Water, and they aren't sure if they're going to want to use the property to expand their water plant in the future. So we were able to get them to agree to a 10-year lease, basically a 10-year lease on just a small portion of the property. So we hope to know more as years go by about what their plans are for the future, but we don't know. They're not willing to do more than 10-year agreement with us at this point.
So then we would create a park for 10 years and then
we're just adding an amenity on a very small portion of the park. It's approximately a 10-acre property right now. So we're just talking about 3/4 of an acre of that site.
Thank you.
Anything else, Ms. Johnson?
No.
Okay. Mr. LeBeer?
Thanks, everyone, for your presentations. And Director Dorr, I just have a quick question. You you spoke about it a little bit, but I just wanted you to clarify if you can. Is it possible how would I say this? Is it possible for the police department to get the FTEs that they're requesting and the equipment et cetera, while keeping our reserves where they're at or potentially increasing them?
Well, let's see. As I was describing for Councilman Beta,
And I think I kind of missed that conversation.
If we achieve the anticipated savings, I beg your pardon, if we achieve the anticipated savings,
I was reading halfway through and then I realized he was talking about this subject.
the expenditures that we were discussing a moment ago include all of those personnel and equipment being approved. So I think the answer to your question is we hope to achieve the savings. If we do, we think our reserves will probably stay level, and that's in anticipation of funding the initiatives that Chief McCaskey described. They wouldn't be increasing or decreasing. Probably stay the same.
Okay, thanks.
We good?
Good as we're going to get.
I appreciate your candidness and honesty. And we needed a nice little laugh, so thank you. Mr. Roybal.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a quick follow-up. You had alluded about the internet tax, and we had talked about it a couple years ago, and then we were waiting for it. Can you give us an update and your projections of what your assessment would be of potential income in the future?
Thank you.
For internet tax?
Great. Yes. Well, I've been talking about this for, I recall meetings with Mayor Burkholder early last decade on this subject. It's been a long and winding road, to say the least. And when you say internet tax, I want to describe that more fully. It's not a tax on citizens for accessing the internet. We all pay, CenturyLink or Comcast or Verizon for access to the internet. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about
sales tax.
It's sales tax on things we buy on the internet. That's what you're describing. And there's been a lot of litigation. The state of Connecticut sued South Dakota. It's been a long and winding road. Congress tried to get some things done on this subject and could not. And at the end of the day, this most recent lawsuit that was decided by the Supreme Court sort of ended the matter once and for all. And may I say, it may be different for the city of Lakewood in terms of we have the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights and all these different things. Okay, while that was all very interesting and meaningful and will have some impact, it became less interesting from a revenue perspective when the Amazon Corporation, which does the vast majority of internet sales, elected to just become licensed and collect and remit local sales tax. That kind of made the internet tax, may I say, nearly a moot point at the end of the day. Nearly, not entirely. But yes, the Amazon Corporation, I can tell you, is one of the top 10 retailers in the city of Lakewood, Colorado. It's a very large, very meaningful retailer in Lakewood. And let me add to that, of course, sales taxes collected on sales generated by the Amazon Corporation, 2/3 are refunded in Tabor, 1/3 is not, etc. So I have no projections at all for the change in the internet tax as you just described it. I don't think it'll be material at all.
So could we get a guesstimation in a couple of years when we have some kind of a track record to, figure out where we're at on that?
You bet. Of course, if there's anything interesting and material, I would let you know. But I'll tell you, in the general fund, if you consider that nearly $80 million is collected in sales and use tax, and it's probably today, I'm thinking less than 100,000, it's a very small percent. But it is something that we're going to continue to monitor and report to council.
Okay, thank you. That's all I got.
Ms. Gutwein.
Thank you. I also agree. What an in-depth presentation by everyone. Thank you so much. And also just the transparency in the whole process, as Councilor Franks brought up. Also want to thank my colleagues for everyone asking their questions ahead of time. I think that really helped us get through this process. I want to add just one additional question. As you're looking at income and projections, I know we looked at the coming year, but are you seeing any indications of recession over the next 3 to 5 or down the road?
Well, let's see. It's been a decade since the start of the Great Recession. Most people agree that typically a business cycle is 10 years, so we would be due for that at any time. In fact, one of my slides, I forgot to refer to it, but I think the timing is probably pretty good now, and I'll just speak about it very, very quickly. And I was discussing the projections completed by the governor's office and that very knowledgeable and experienced set of economists down at the state capitol. And I put a quote there, and I forgot to read it, but right above the Legislative Council, they wrote in their report, which I read very thoroughly, they wrote, higher than usual forecast uncertainty. Higher than usual forecast uncertainty. I've never seen anything like that before. So I think what that says is, hi, we're predicting 7% sales tax revenue increase next year at the state, but that's probably very difficult to bank on. So we do not have that in our strategic plan. I don't think we're quite as bold as to say, you know, we need to probably cut sales tax revenues 5 to 7%. I don't think that's necessary. But I will tell you that we have a very agile management team with lots of experience dealing with these kinds of things. Of note, the last Great Recession, no services were reduced for the community. No worker furloughs, no layoffs. We did defer some capital projects, but I think the impacts to the community were very, very small. So I think when you mesh all of those things together, I feel confident in proceeding without frankly, what many people are calling a doomsday forecast. And had I been so bold as to do something like that, I might have done it 3 years ago and been wrong. So I think it was a good idea to just sort of stay the course and hope that a coming recession will be a mild one.
So, in other words, other than it being approximately the anticipated time, there's no indications of recession?
No, in fact, I review the income and expense of the city every single month in great detail and look for those signs. And of course, we would probably all know about it in this room as we were seeing the numbers, but I report those to the city manager. We're looking at those with our budget and audit board. We have had some really good accuracy, obviously, in the past, but we've also, I can tell you, when we did our 2009 budget in 2008, we were right where we are today. I recall that vividly, saying, you know, there could be a recession and it could be scary, and it was. That all came true. We had a very moderate increase in revenue, and revenues went down 8 to 10%. But we were able to respond. We were able to, hold on some vacant positions and do a variety of different things to make it all work out. So I think we're poised, if needed, to do that again.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. Beta?
Thank you, Mayor. Just one other question. It's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that the budget that we've got proposed here, that you've proposed, Director Dorr, does not assume anything with Tabor, correct? In other words, we're not assuming anything, I guess we would assume that it's not going to pass, and this is based upon our projections from previous years, period.
Your assumption's correct, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, well done, Ms. Hodson, Mr. Dorr, M-Team. That was amazing. This is the 11th time I've been through this, and this was very well done, very thorough. Great questions by council. I'll just say that, Ms. Hodson, you run a lean and mean operation. You always have. Our city has low property taxes, no pensions, one of the lowest sales tax rates in the metro area, almost no debt, a strong sales tax, and healthy reserves. So we continue to do well, and it's not because of the genius up here, it's because of the folks who are here day in and day out doing their hard work. So thank you all very much. Will the clerk please read item 4?
Item 4, presentation 2018 revised 2019 Lakewood Reinvestment Authority budget.
Commissioner Skilling thought we were done for the night. This one usually goes pretty fast.
Thank you. Treasurer Larry Dorr. I have to drop my finance director title to present to you the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority budget. It's much thinner. It's, let's see if I can count, I don't know, it's about 20 pages, 25. Similarly, it is presented on our lakewood.org website. We will not print off another copy. You can see these glorious pictures of Alameda Parkway and the construction that's happening there. You can enjoy that construction site as you leave City Hall tonight in your cars. And I'm just going to jump right into it. But I do have a few items of, I think, important note for those commissioners who are experiencing the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority vote for the first time. So I want to just do a little bit of orientation. Thank you very much. The voters of Lakewood approved the formation of the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority under Colorado law in 1997. And in a separate question, the voters required that mayor and city council serve as the board. That's a little bit of the history. Your board created 4 reinvestment areas and authorized 4 reinvestment projects. Those reinvestment areas, I've gotten a map here in a moment, but the projects are at the JCRS. They are at the Wadsworth and 13th Avenue Wadsworth Bridge for light rail, the Belmar project, and also the Creekside project at the northeast intersection of Colfax and Wadsworth. The LRA is an urban renewal authority under Colorado law, and you can avail yourself to that if you're interested. And what the purpose of it is, and the reason that it stands alone, is that the urban renewal authorities of the state, like the LRA, have authorities and powers that the city does not. And so hence the reason for its creation. Otherwise, what would be the purpose? And the major tool, of course, is to implement redevelopment. And those projects, I can tell you, would not be present without the creation of the LRA. Just that simple. So its mission is to first encourage private reinvestment within designated areas. And Councilman Abel brought up earlier the Kmart on West Colfax, which is now the Creekside redevelopment at Colfax Wadsworth. And there was a Kmart store there. It was closed for 10 years. Before any change came about. And the hope and the mission was that private reinvestment would occur in that particular area without taxpayer funds, without city involvement, but that didn't happen. And later, the council created that as a project. There was interest on the part of a developer, Walmart, and here you are with the project. So enhance the city's ability to preserve and restore the vitality and quality of life in the community. And if you recall the site of that Kmart, it was blight. It was very unsightly. It was a nuisance to the public, and quite frankly, it was unsafe as well. There were a lot of bad things happening in that part of the community. The Lakewood Reinvestment Authority is different than other urban renewal authorities across the state of Colorado. In fact, very different. I think, from my opinion, I think it is probably in keeping most closely with the original intentions of urban renewal authority. I know there's a definition of blight in the law and all this, but I prefer to say I know it when I see it. There are other communities that say, there just aren't improvements in this nice prairie land, and so it's blighted. Well, I don't know. Prairie land can be kind of appealing, but our neighbors to the east might disagree with me on that, and that's their prerogative. But it's primarily intended for commercial areas. There's a famous historic history of urban renewal in another Lakewood, another state in the state of Ohio, and I'll invite you to watch the 60 Minutes program on Lakewood, Ohio, and their foray into residential urban renewal. It's quite vivid. Our historical objectives in Lakewood have been to utilize these tools when private investment just isn't working or is not present at all. One of the interesting things about the LRA is it has never done traditional project development, meaning most traditionally, an urban renewal authority would go out and borrow lots and lots and lots of money and give that money over to an investor developer. This has been done in a number of cities across the Front Range, even in Jefferson County. And then that private development comes in, and then that creates tax money that the urban renewal authority then uses to repay its own debt. The city of Lakewood has never done that. We don't do that. What we've done is we've structured these various agreements where, for example, Walmart built the channel. Walmart paid to tear down Kmart. Walmart built the channel around Creekside. Belmar, they built their own parking structures. They borrowed the money to do that. And then later, if their project is successful, that creates sales tax and property tax increment. And that money is used to repay those property owners for their upfront investment. So if there's virtually no risk to the city of Lakewood or the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority, because if for some reason those projects aren't successful or don't develop enough revenue to repay those people, that's their issue. It's not the community's issue. And then also, if the projects are successful, people will choose to shop there or not. And so that's kind of been our focus as a community, is that initial investment should come from developers, and that's what's occurred there. Okay, so now more specifics on the budget. I mentioned completely independent books and records, and I mean that by saying there are separate bank accounts, there's separate letterhead, there's a separate audit, there's a separate tax ID. We have a separate set of minutes, I mean the whole thing. We have generally operating monies and project monies, and we don't have any employee per se who at City Hall says, I work for the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority. No, we do charge some administrative expenses there. For example, accounting work and some of our other administrative, type work. It's more than one person, and it adds up to 0.35 FTEs. And as you'll see in a moment when I show you the funds flow, you'll see that primarily the LRA works as a pass-through. We get tax increment in September from Jefferson County. We pay that property tax increment out to those people who've made those substantial investments in parking garages or drainage or whatever the case may be. Here are the 4 areas. There are 4, but I think of them as 2 because they're really kind of overlapping, and you can sort of see where they are. But the big news that's going on out there related to the LRA is, without a doubt, the Alameda Streetscape project. Construction is roaring. I don't even hardly have to bring it up to the city council, but maybe some others in the audience, other than people who work here, would be interested in seeing this. I mean, if you don't get below 6th Avenue in Lakewood, you may not know this is going on, but that's probably very, very few people. So, I could get into what we're doing out there, but I think you're all seeing it. Medians, all kinds of utility locates, in the intersection changes. These, one of the things I learned about in studying to present this and be prepared to answer your questions is a safety matter that I hadn't thought about. Traffic engineers and transportation engineers do not like the middle lane in the middle of the road where you get into that lane and then you make a left turn, because somebody else going the other way is kind of doing the same thing, and it turns into a game of chicken, and you want to have the biggest SUV. So that's not safe, and these medians will alleviate that. One of the things we're doing is working with the businesses, because they want people to get into their businesses, but you have the ability to go down to the next signal and make a U-turn and come back. So we've considered all of those things, and we have terrific engineers working on the project. Well, I got to ask my 20 questions of the team, and the construction began in April. We have about 40 workers on site, and I tell you, they are working. It's amazing to see the work that they're doing. I want a completion date, because I think that's important. And being transparent, and there are really 2 of them. One, the hardscaping, is 12/31. That's cement, power poles, all those, or not power poles, but light poles and those kinds of things. But they're not going to landscape that in the middle of the winter. That would be a total waste of money. So that will probably be done for the spring planting. And of course, there'll be considerations for, xeriscaping and so forth. If you see the revenues and expenditures, let me just go on the left side here. Sales tax increment, property tax increment, and there's a little interest earned for a couple of days while the funds get transferred around. So money comes in, it goes out. Expenditures, 94% flows through, as I said, to others. And we do have some administrative expenses. I mentioned a little bit of the personnel. I mentioned we have some banking fees, some small legal costs, and we do budget for some consultant work that's very, very small, but that's a part of that service and supply. So here's the budget. We do have a lot flowing out. This is a major project going on out there, and I tell you, this team working on it is working very diligently to bring that in on time and under budget. And I'll certainly have a report for you at next year's budget study session on how all this turned out. As Mr. Hutchison brought up earlier, this project is being paid for through three sources. First, the LRA, and that's the biggest chunk, one. Two, the owners of Belmar, which is the Starwood Corporation, they're putting in multi-millions of dollars as well. Three, the City of Lakewood Capital Improvement and Preservation Plan is paying a portion because it would have done ordinary street resurfacing, and so it's paying for that as it was. And then last but not least, just because it's such a dynamic and fluid project, we do have available from the Economic Development Fund to contribute up to $2 million to the project as well. So you would expect those funds to be spent on the project. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would entertain any questions. And the Lakewood Reinvestment Authority's budget is adopted by a resolution of the LRA, which is you all, and that will be done just once on October 22nd. There won't be a second public hearing on the LRA budget, just the one tonight and late in October. But again, we're not done with any of this business. We'll entertain any questions at any time and be responsive to you and to the community whenever needed. And that is my final slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner LeBeer?
I just have a quick question about how projects are identified. Is that with the assistance of the private sector, or is that just something that's in-house, staff's doing, or like?
Well, there is a formal identification of a project, and that's undertaken by an action of the board. So there is a formal designation accomplished by resolution, and that's usually the last thing done, quite honestly, in identifying a project. But having been a part of each of these over the number of years, I can tell you that there are a lot of starts and stops. There are a lot of conceptual designs, a lot of project estimates, a lot of different styles of projects that might occur, residential and commercial mix, 100% commercial, 100% residential. It tends to be a fluid process that involves many others, excluding myself. It typically starts with our city manager and our planning director and their sort of involvement in the community and property owners and investors in what's possible in a given project area. So they tend to take lots of time to get off the ground, years. To get those going, if that's helpful.
Thanks.
All right, any other questions? I'm going to open the public input portion. Nobody's signed up to speak. Seeing none, I'll close the public input. And thank you very much. All right, let's move into reports. And I'm going to start all the way down on my right with Ms. Johnson.
No report.
Ms. Vincent?
Just a comment. The last several weeks, I've been asked multiple questions about votes that have happened on this council. I'd like to just encourage everybody out there that how everyone voted is posted online. And while I can answer questions to anybody in any ward about why I voted and how, I can't answer for anybody else. So I think the council is very open about talking to anybody at any time, explaining their vote. So if you want to go in there and find out and then ask those specific councilors questions, I would encourage you to do so.
Thank you. Mr. Beta?
Just a reminder, we have our ward meeting this Saturday, 9 o'clock, Philibus United Methodist Church on Pearson, Florida.
Great. Ms. Franks? Mr. Roybal?
No report.
Mr. LeBear?
No report.
Mr. Abel?
No report.
Ms. Harrison?
No report.
Mr. Skilling? Ms. Gutwein?
No report.
Whoa, okay, well, I have a few things. So Second Wind Fund was back in Lakewood on Saturday, and I'm going to give a shout out to Councilor Skilling, who ran the 5K in Green Mountain representing the city council. So well done. I won my weight class. He won his weight class. And he's still a little bit sore, but it is Suicide Prevention Month, and it's really cool that that is back. And that started in Green Mountain with 4 student deaths. Unfortunately, we still have more suicides, but it's in over 30 counties throughout the state, and they've saved over 5,000 lives. So that was really cool. And then I had the opportunity to go to the groundbreaking of Archway's new project off of West Colfax. It's kind of part 2. And that'll be an affordable housing project with 25 dedicated veteran apartments. So that's really exciting.